All right, sorry about that. Had to deal with some technical issues as well as some miscellaneous drama. That is now mostly resolved. We'll find out how resolved it is later. Yes, hello, welcome back to Fraggoth Reads, or Radio Free Book Learning, the stream? I don't know. We'll keep workshopping that one. I'm Fraggoth. I'm going to do some live narration again of Endymion, the sequel to the Hyperion Cantos. Let's see, previously on major events that transpired, the Shrike showed up while our plucky band was on whatever planet they were on that their ship had crash landed on after going through the farcaster portal on Renaissance Vector. The Shrike shows up and just kind of pokes around. Just kind of shows up there and looks around, scopes the joint out, and then dips. Not sure what the Shrike's all about, but it appears to be free in the Farcaster web, for good or ill. And so our plucky band of heroes continue down the river Tethys. Let me look that up. I meant to check a couple different pronunciations. It looks like Tethys. It is not. Let's try pronunciation of river Tethys. I just realized that I have my microphone hotkeyed to my H key, so typing becomes an interesting experience. Normally this wouldn't be an issue. But it is here. Okay, so Tethys or Tethys apparently are fine, so I'll stick with Tethys for now. Anyway, the River Tethys is what we are calling the pathway between the Farcaster portals. That's what they're traveling down, and they pop through eventually onto a planet that is entirely covered in ocean, with three impressive moons. And so they're like, well, I guess this is probably Mare Infinitus, the storied Mare Infinitus that the consul's his grandmother, his mom. Anyway, the consul from Hyperion comes from there, ultimately, where a revolution was fought and incidentally lost against the hegemony. It is a Pax-occupied world. It is sort of backwater adjacent, but there is valuable mineral stuff there, so there is a Pax presence here. They do eventually find the other Farcaster portal, but unfortunately there's some kind of a military base, outpost, floating on the water next to it. So while the raft that they're on, that they've built, I should have probably mentioned they built a raft, The raft that they've built is cruising that way. Raul says, okay, let me go do some reconnaissance and check this military base out, see if, in a worst case scenario, I can distract them. And that is basically where we left off, except he's kind of been found. He has literally bumped into one of the guards there, and we're going to find out what happens next. I had something significant I had to check. What is it? Why is that? Anyway. Give me one sec to get a little watered up here, and we will get rocking with the rollin'. "32. They grow weary of death. After 8 star systems in 63 days, 8 terrible deaths and 8 painful resurrections for each of the 4 men, Father Captain de Soya, Sergeant Gregorius, Corporal Key, and Lancer Rettig are weary of death and rebirth. Each time now, upon his resurrection, de Soya stands naked in front of a mirror, seeing his skin raw and glistening like someone who has been flayed alive. I forgot to change the cover art. My apologies. I have one for this. I think. Possibly. I think it's this one here. That's the one. My bad. Each time now, upon his resurrection, de Soya stands naked in front of a mirror, seeing his skin raw and glistening like someone who has been flayed alive, gingerly touching the now livid, now crimson cruciform under the flesh of his chest. In the days following each resurrection, de Soya is distracted, his hands shaking a bit more each time. Voices come to him from afar. He cannot seem to concentrate totally, whether his interlocutor is a Pax Admiral or a planetary governor or a parish priest. De Soya begins dressing like a parish priest, trading his trim Pax priest captain uniform for the cassock and collar. He has a rosary on his belt thong and says it almost constantly, working it like Arabic worry beads. Prayer calms him, brings his thoughts to order. Father Captain de Soya no longer dreams of Aenea as his daughter. He no longer dreams of Renaissance Vector and his sister Maria. He dreams of Armageddon, terrible dreams of burning orbital forests, of worlds aflame, of death beams walking over fertile farming valleys and leaving only corpses. He knows after their first River Tethys world that he has miscalculated. 2 standard years to cover 200 worlds, he had said in Renaissance system, figuring 3 days resurrection in each system, a warning and then translation to the next. It does not work that way. His first world is Tau Ceti Center, former administrative capital of the far-flung hegemony world web. Home to tens of billions during the days of the web, surrounded by an actual ring of orbital cities and habitats, served by space elevators, farcasters, the River Tethys, the Grand Concourse, the Fat Line, and more,
center to the hegemonic datum plane megasphere, and home of Government House, the site of Maina Gladstone's death by infuriated mobs after the destruction of the web farcasters by force ships on her command, TC2 was hard hit by the fall. Floating buildings crashed as the power grid went down. Other urban spires, some many hundreds of stories tall, were served only by farcasters and lacked stairs or elevators. Tens of thousands starved or perished from falls before they could be lifted out by skimmer. The world had no agriculture of its own, bringing its food from 1,000 worlds via planet-based farcasters and great orbital spaceborne portals. The starvation riots lasted 50 local years on TC2, over 30 standard, and when they were finished, billions had died from human hands, to add to the total of billions dead from hunger. Tau Ceti Center had been a sophisticated, wanton world during the days of the web. Few religions had taken hold there except the most self-indulgent or violent ones. The Church of the Final Atonement, the Shrike cult, had been popular among the bored sophisticates. But during the centuries of hegemony expansion, the only true object of worship on TC2 had been power. The pursuit of power, the proximity to power, the preservation of power. Power had been the god of billions, and when that god failed, and pulled down billions of its worshippers in its failure, the survivors cursed the memories of power amid their urban ruins, scratching out a peasant's living in the shadows of the rotting skyscrapers, pulling their own plows through weeded lots between the abandoned highways and flyways and the skeletons of old Grand Concourse malls, fishing for carp where the river Tethys had carried thousands of elaborate yachts and pleasure barges each day. Tau Ceti Center had been ripe for born-again Christianity, for the new Catholicism, and when the church missionaries and Pax Police had arrived 60 standard years after the fall, conversion of the planet's few billion survivors was sincere and universal. The tall, ruined but still white spires of business and government during the web were finally torn down, their stone and smart glass and plasteel recycled into massive cathedrals, raised by the hands of the new Tau Ceti born again, filled each day of the week by the thankful and faithful. The Archbishop of Tau Ceti became one of the most important and, yes, powerful humans in the re-emerging human domain, now known as Pax Space, rivaling His Holiness on Pacem in influence. This power grew, found boundaries that could not be overstepped without incurring papal wrath. The excommunication of His Excellency Klaus Cardinal Cronenberg in the year of our Lord 2978, or 126 after the fall, helped settle those boundaries, and it continued to grow within those bounds. So Father Captain de Soya discovers on his first jump from Renaissance space. 2 years, he had anticipated, approximately 600 days and 200 self-imposed deaths to cover all of the former River Tethys worlds. He and his Swiss Guard troopers are on Tau Ceti Center for 8 days. The Raphael enters the system with its automatic beacon pulsing in code. Pax ships respond and rendezvous within 14 hours. It takes another 8 hours to decelerate into TC2 orbital traffic, and another 4 to transfer the bodies to a formal resurrection crash in the planetary capital of St. Paul. 1 full day is thus lost. After 3 days of formal resurrection and another day of enforced rest, de Soya meets with the Archbishop of TC2. TC squared, it's a supertext 2, of TC squared, Her Excellency Achilla Silvasky. Could be a Sheila. A Shia? Achilla, and then Silvasky is as it sounds. I'm going to go with Achilla. Her Excellency Achilla Silvasky, and must endure another full day of formalities. Desoya carries the papal disci, an almost unheard-of delegation of power, and the court of the archbishop must sniff out the reason and projected results of that power like hunting dogs on a scent. Within hours, Desoya gets the slightest hint of the layers of intrigue and complexity within this struggle for provincial power. Archbishop Silvasky cannot aspire to become cardinal, for after the Let's try this again. Archbishop Silvasky cannot aspire to become cardinal, for after the Cronenberg excommunication, no spiritual leader of TC² can rise to a rank higher than archbishop without transfer to Pacham and the Vatican. But her current power in this sector of the Pax far outweighs that of most cardinals, and the temporal subset of that power puts Pax fleet admirals in their place. She must understand this delegation of papal authority that Desoya carries, and render it harmless to her ends. Father Captain Desoya does not give a damn about Archbishop Silvasky's paranoia or the church politics on TC². He cares only about stopping up the escape route of the farcaster portals there. On the 5th day since his translation to Tau Ceti space, he makes the 500 meters from St. Paul's Cathedral and the Archbishop's Palace to the river, just part of a minor tributary channeled into a canal flowing through the city, but once part of the Tethys. The huge farcaster portals, still extant because any attempt to dismantle them had promised a thermonuclear explosion according to engineers, have long since been draped over by church banners, but they are close together here. The Tethys had meandered only 2 kilometers from portal to portal, past the busy government house and the formal Deer Park gardens. Now Father Captain Desoya, his 3 troopers, and the scores of watchful Pax troops loyal to Archbishop Silvasky who accompany them, can stand at the first portal and look down the grassy banks at a 30-meter-long tapestry, showing the martyrdom of St. Paul, hanging from the second portal clearly visible beyond the blooming peach trees of the bishopric palace gardens. Because this section of the former Tethys is now within Her Excellency's private gardens, guards are posted along the length of the canal and on all bridges crossing it. While there is no special attention to the ancient artifacts that were once farcaster portals, the officers of the palace guard assure Desoya that no vessels or unauthorized individuals have passed through those portals, nor been seen along the banks of the canal. Desoya insists that a permanent guard be placed upon the portals. He wants cameras erected for 29-hour-a-day surveillance there. He wants sensors, alarms, and tripwires. The local Pax troops confer with their archbishop and grudgingly comply with this perceived slight to their sovereignty. Desoya all but despairs at this useless politics. On their 6th day, Corporal Key falls ill to a mysterious fever and is hospitalized. Desoya believes it is a result of their resurrection. Each of them has privately suffered the shakes, emotional swings, and minor ailments. On the 7th day, Key is able to walk and implores Desoya to get him out of the infirmary and off this world, but now the Archbishop insists that Desoya help celebrate a high mass that evening in honor of His Holiness, Pope Julius. Desoya can hardly refuse, so that night, amid scepters and pink-buttoned Monsignore, beneath the giant insignia of His Holiness's triple crown and crossed keys, which also appears on the papal disci that Desoya now wears around his neck, amid the smoke of incense, white mitres, and the tinkle of bells, under the solemn singing of a 600-member children's choir, the simple priest-warrior from Madre de Dios, and the elegant archbishop celebrate the mystery of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Sergeant Gregorius takes communion that evening from Desoya's hand, which he does every day of their quest, as do a few dozen others also chosen to receive the host, secret to the success of their cruciform immortality in this life, while 3,000 of the faithful pray and watch in the dim cathedral light. On the 8th day, they leave the system, and for the first time, Father Captain Desoya welcomes the coming death as a means of escape. They are resurrected in a creche on Heaven's Gate, a once miserable world terraformed to shade trees and comfort in the days of the web, now largely fallen back to boiling mud, pestilent swamps, unbreathable atmosphere, and the blazing radiation source of Vega Prime in the sky. Raphael's idiot computer has chosen this series of old River Tethys worlds, finding the most efficient order to visit them in since there were no clues on Renaissance V. That's a period, meaning it is not the end of a sentence. Finding the most efficient order to visit them in, since there were no clues on Renaissance V to show where the portal there might have led. But Desoya is interested that they are coming closer and closer to Old Earth's system, less than 12 light years from TC Square, just a little more than 8 from Heaven's Gate. Desoya realizes that he would like to visit Old Earth system, even without Old Earth, despite the fact that Mars and the other inhabited worlds, moons, and asteroids there have become provincial backwaters, of no more interest to the Pax than Madre de Dios had been. But the Tethys never flowed through Old Earth system, so Desoya must swallow his curiosity and be satisfied that the next few worlds will be even close to Old Earth's former home. Heaven's Gate takes 8 days as well, but not because of intra-church politics. There is a small Pax garrison in orbit around the planet, but they rarely go down to the ruined world. Heaven's Gate's population of 400 million residents had been reduced to 8 or 10 crazy prospectors wandering its mud-flat surface in the 274 standard years since the fall. The ouster swarms had swept by this Vegan world even before Gladstone had ordered the farcasters destroyed, destroying the orbital containment sphere, lancing the capital of Mudflat City with its lovely promenade gardens, plasma bombing the atmosphere-generating stations it had taken centuries to build, and generally plowing the world under before the loss of farcaster connections salted the earth so that nothing would grow there again. So now the Pax garrison guards the broiling planet for its rumored raw materials, but has little reason to go down there. Desoya must convince the garrison commander, Pax Major Leem, that an expedition has to be mounted. On the 5th day after Raphael's entry into the Vega system, Desoya, Gregorius, Key, Rettig, a Lieutenant Bristol, and a dozen Pax Garrison troops fitted out in environmental hazard suits take a dropship to the mudflats where the River Tethys had once flowed. The Farcaster portals are not there. "I thought it was impossible to destroy them," says Desoya. "The Technocore built them to last and booby-trapped them so that destruction is impossible." "They're not here," says Lieutenant Bristol, and gives the order to return to orbit. Desoya stops him. Using his papal disky as authority, Desoya insists that a full sensor search be made. The Farcasters are found, 16 clicks apart and buried under almost 100 meters of mud. "That solves your mystery," says Major Leem on tight beam. "Either the ouster attack or later mudslides buried the portals and what had been the river. This world is literally gone to hell." "Perhaps," says Desoya, "but I want the Farcasters excavated, temporary environmental bubbles erected around them so that someone coming through would survive, and a permanent guard mounted at each portal." "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" Major Leem explodes, and then, remembering the papal disky, he adds, "Sir?" "Not yet," says Desoya, glowering into the camera. "I want these done within 72 hours, Major, or you will be serving the next 3 standard years on the planetary detail down here." It takes 70 hours to excavate, construct the domes, and post the guard. Someone traveling the River Tethys will find no river here, of course, only the boiling mud, noxious, unbreathable atmosphere, and wailing troopers in full battle armor. Desoya goes to his knees on the Raphael last night in orbit around Heaven's Gate, and prays that Aenea has not already come this way. Her bones were not found in the excavated mud and sulfur, but the Pax engineer in charge of the excavation tells Desoya that the soil is so toxic here in its natural form that the child's bones could already have been eaten away by acid. Desoya does not believe this to be the case. On the 9th day, he translates out of system with a warning to Major Leem to keep the guards vigilant, the domes livable, and his mouth more civil to future visitors. No one waits to resurrect them in the 3rd system Raphael brings them to. The Archangel ship enters system NGC, oh my lord, Supertext ES 2629 with its cargo of dead men and its beacons flashing Pax Fleet code. There is no response. There are 8 planets in NGC Supertext ES 2629, but only one of them, known by the prosaic name of NGC Supertext ES 2629-4BIV, can support life. From the records still available to Raphael, it seems likely that the Hegemony and Technocore had gone to the effort and expense of extending the river Tethys here as a form of self-indulgence, an aesthetic statement. The planet has never been seriously colonized or terraformed except for random RNA seeding during the early days of the Hegera, and appears to have been part of the River Tethys tour strictly for scenic and animal viewing purposes. That is not to say that there are not human beings on the world now, as the Raphael sniffs them out in parking orbit during the last days of its passengers' automated resurrections. As best the limited resources of the Raphael's near-AI computers can reconstruct and understand, NGC Supertext ES 2629-4BIV's minimum population of visiting biologists, zoologists, tourists, and support teams had been stranded after the fall and had gone native. Despite prodigious breeding over almost 3 centuries, however, only a few thousand human beings still populated the jungles and highlands of the primitive world. The RNA-seeded beasties there were capable of eating human beings, and they did so with gusto. Raphael runs to the edge of its limits in the simple task of finding the farcaster portals. Available web records in its memory say simply that the portals are set at varying intervals along a 6,000-kilometer river in the northern hemisphere. Raphael modifies its orbit to a roughly synchronous point above the massive continent which dominates that hemisphere and begins photographing and radar mapping the river. Unfortunately, there are 3 massive rivers on that continent, 2 flowing to the east, 1 to the west, and Raphael is unable to prioritize probabilities. It decides to map all 3, a task of analyzing more than 20,000 kilometers of data. When the 4 men's hearts begin to beat at the end of the 3rd day of the resurrection cycle, Raphael feels some silicon equivalent of relief. Listening to the computer's description of the task ahead while he stands naked in front of the mirror in his tiny cubby, Federico de Soya feels no relief. In truth, he feels like weeping. He thinks of Mother Captain Stone, Mother Captain Boulay, and Captain Hearn, on the Great Wall frontier by now, and quite possibly engaging the ouster enemy in fierce combat. De Soya envies them the simplicity and honesty of their task. After conferring with Sergeant Gregorius and his 2 men, De Soya reviews the data, immediately rejects the western-flowing river as too unscenic for the river Tethys, since it flows primarily through deep canyons, away from the life-infested jungles and marshes. The second river he rejects because of the obvious number of waterfalls and rapids, too rough for river Tethys traffic. And so he begins a simple, fast radar mapping of the longest river with its long, gentle stretches. The map will show up dozens, perhaps hundreds, of natural obstacles resembling farcaster portals, rocky waterfalls, natural bridges, boulder fields, and rapids, but these can be scanned by the human eye in a few hours. On their 5th day, the portals are located, improbably far apart, but inarguably artificial. De Soya personally flies the dropship, leaving Corporal Key in the Raphael as backup in case of emergency. One sec, there is some Robobot from Twitch telling me about best viewers. Best viewers, purchase your viewers. You can become great success on the Twitch platforms. That's good. I'm happy for you, boo. We're not in it for the money. This is the scenario DeSoya has dreaded. No way to tell if the girl has come this way with or without her ship. The stretch between the inert farcasters is the longest yet, almost 200 kilometers, and although they fly the dropship back and forth over the jungle and river's edge, there is no telling if anyone has passed this way, no witness to interview, no Pax troops to leave on guard here. They land on an island not far from the upper farcaster, and DeSoya, Gregorius, and Rettig discuss their options.
It's been 3 standard weeks since the ship passed through the Farcaster on Renaissance V,
says Gregorius. The interior of their dropship is cramped and utilitarian. They discuss things from their flight chairs. Gregorius's and Rettig's combat armor hang in the EVA closet like metal second skins.
If they came through to a world like this, says Rettig, they probably just took off in the ship. There's no reason they have to keep going down the river.
True, says DeSoya, but there is a good chance the ship was damaged.
Aye, says the sergeant, but how badly? Could it have flown, patched itself as it went, perhaps made it to an ouster repair base? We're not that far from the outback here.
Or the girl could have sent the ship off and gone through the next Farcaster, says Rettig. Assuming any of the other portals work, says DeSoya tiredly. That the one on Renaissance V was not just a fluke. I'm going to repeat that sentence because I mangled that. My apologies. Assuming any of the other portals work, says DeSoya tiredly, that the one on Renaissance V was not just a fluke. Gregorius sets his huge hands on his knees.
Aye, sir, this is ridiculous. Finding a needle in a haystack, as they used to say. That would be child's play compared to this.
Father Captain DeSoya looks out through the dropship windows. The high ferns here are blowing in a silent wind. I have a feeling she's going down the old river. I think she'll use the Farcasters. I don't know how. The flying machine that someone used to get her out of the Valley of the Time Tombs, maybe. An inflatable raft, a stolen boat. I just think she's using the Tethys.
What can we do here? Asks Rettig. If she's already come through, we've missed her. If she's not yet arrived, well, we could wait forever. If we had 100 Archangel ships so that we could bring troops to each of these worlds.
DeSoya nods. In his hours of prayer, his mind often slips away to the thought of how much simpler this task would be if the Archangel couriers were simple robotic craft, translating into Pax systems, broadcasting the papal diski authority and ordering the search, then jumping out of system without even decelerating. As far as he knows, the Pax is building no robot ships. The Church's hatred of AIs and the dependence upon human contact all but forbids it. And as far as he knows, there are only 3 Archangel-class courier ships in existence. The Michael, the Gabriel that had first brought him the message, and his own Raphael. In Renaissance system, he had wanted to send the other courier ship out in search, but the Michael had pressing Vatican duties. Intellectually, DeSoya understood why this search was his and his alone. But here they have spent almost 3 weeks and searched 2 worlds. A robot Archangel could leap into 200 systems and broadcast the alert in less than 10 standard days. At this rate, it will take DeSoya and the Raphael 4 or 5 standard years. The exhausted Father Captain has the urge to laugh.
There's still her ship, he says briskly. If they go on without it, they have 2 options. Send the ship somewhere else, or leave it behind on one of the Tethys worlds. You say they, sir, Gregorius says softly. Are you sure there are others?
Someone lifted her from our trap on Hyperion, says DeSoya. There are others.
It could be an entire ouster crew,
says Rettig. "They could be halfway back to their swarm by now, after leaving the girl on any of these worlds. Or they could be taking her with them." DeSoya lifts a hand to shut off conversation. They have been around and around this before.
"I think the ship was hit and damaged," he says. "We look for it, and it may lead us to the girl."
Gregorius points to the jungle. It is raining there.
"We've flown this entire stretch of river between the portals. No sign of a ship. When we get to the next pack system, we could send back garrison troops to watch these portals."
"Yes," says Father Captain DeSoya, "but they'll have a time debt of 8 or 9 months. He looks at the rain streaking the windshield and side ports. "We'll search the river." "What?" says Lancer Rettig. "If you had a damaged ship and had to leave it behind, wouldn't you hide it?" asks DeSoya. The 2 Swiss Guard troopers stare at their commander. DeSoya sees that the men's fingers are trembling. Resurrection is affecting them as well. We'll deep radar the river and as much of the jungle as we can," says the Father Captain. "It'll take another day at least," begins Rettig. DeSoya nods. "We'll have Corporal Key instruct Raphael to deep radar the jungle on a 200-click swatch on either side of the river. We'll use the dropship to search the river. We have a cruder system on board, but less to cover." The exhausted troopers can only nod their obedience. They find something on the second sweep of the river. The object is metal, large, and in a deep pool only a few kilometers downriver from the first portal. The dropship hovers while DeSoya tight-beams the Raphael.
"Corporal, we are going to investigate. I want the ship ready to lance this thing within 3 seconds of my command. But only on my command."
"I understand, sir," tight-beams Key. DeSoya holds the dropship in hover while Gregorius and Rettig suit up, prepare the proper tools, and stand in the open airlock.
"Go,"
says DeSoya. Sergeant Gregorius drops out of the lock, the suit's EM system kicking in just before the armored man strikes water. Both Sergeant and Lancer swoop above the surface, weapons ready.
"We have the deep radar lock on tactical,"
Gregorius acknowledges on tight beam. "Your video feeds are nominal," says DeSoya from his command chair. "Commence dive." Both men drop, strike the surface, and disappear beneath it. DeSoya banks the dropship so he can see out the port blister. The river is a dark green, but 2 bright headlamps can be seen gleaming through the water. "About 8 meters beneath the surface," he begins.
"Got it,"
says the sergeant. DeSoya looks up at the monitor. He sees a swirling silt, a many-gilled fish hurrying out of the light, a curved metal hull.
"There's a hatch or airlock open," reports Gregorius. "Most of the thing's buried in the mud here, but I could see enough of the hull to say that it's about the right size. Rettig will stay out here. I'm going in."
DeSoya has the urge to say, "Good luck," but keeps his silence. The men have been together long enough to know what is appropriate with each other. He trims the dropship, readying the crude plasma gun that is the tiny ship's only armament. The video feed stops as soon as Gregorius enters the open hatch. A minute passes. Then 2. 2 minutes beyond that, and DeSoya is all but squirming in the command chair. He half expects to see the spaceship leap out of the water, clawing for space in a desperate attempt to escape. "Lancer," he says.
"Yes, sir,"
comes Rettig's voice. "No word or video from the sergeant?"
"No, sir. I think the hull's blocking tight beam. I'll wait another 5 minutes and—" "Hold it, sir. I see something." DeSoya sees it too, the feed from the Lancer's video murky in the thick water, but clear enough to show Sergeant Gregorius's armored helmet, shoulders and arms rising from the open airlock hatch. The sergeant's headlamp illuminates silt and riverweed, the light swinging to blind Rettig's camera for an instant.
Father Captain de Sawyer, comes Gregorius's bass rumble, only slightly out of breath. This ain't it, sir. I think this one of those old go-anywhere yachts that rich folks had back in the web days, sir. You know, sir, the kind that was submersible. Could even fly a bit, I think.
De Sawyer lets out his breath. What happened to it, Sergeant? The suited figure on the video gives a thumbs up to Rettig, and the two men rise toward the surface.
I think they scuttled it, sir, says Gregorius. There are at least 10 skeletons on board, maybe a dozen. 2 of them are kids. As I say, sir, this thing was rigged to float on any ocean, go under it if they wanted, so there's no way all the hatches open by accident, sir.
De Sawyer watches out the window as the two figures in combat armor break the surface of the river and hover 5 meters above it, water pouring from their suits.
I think they must have been stranded here after the fall, sir, Gregorius is saying, and just decided to end it all there, sir. It's only a guess, Father Captain, but I have a hunch.
I have a hunch you're right, Sergeant, says De Sawyer. Come on back. He opens the dropship hatch as the suited figures fly toward it. Before they arrive, while he is still alone, De Sawyer raises his hand and mouths a blessing of the river, the sunken craft, and those entombed there. The Church does not sanctify suicides, but the Church knows that little is certain in life or death. Or at least De Sawyer knows this, even if the Church does not. They leave motion detectors sending beams across each of the portals. They will not catch the girl and her allies, but they will tell the troops De Sawyer will send back whether anyone has passed that way in the interim. And then they lift the dropship from NGC Supertext EX 2629-4BIV, tuck the stubby dropship into the ugly mass of Raphael above the gleaming limb of the cloud-swirled planet, and accelerate out of the world's gravity wells so that they can translate to their next stop, Barnard's World. This is as close as De Sawyer's pursuit itinerary will come to Old Earth system, a mere 6 light-years, and since this was one of the earliest interstellar colonies of the pre-Hegira era, the priest captain likes to think that he will be getting a glimpse back in time of Old Earth itself. Upon resurrection in the Pax base, some 6 AUs from Barnard's World, however, De Sawyer immediately notes the differences. Barnard's star is a red dwarf, only about 1/5 the mass of Old Earth's G-type star, and less than 1/2500th the luminosity. Only the proximity of Barnard's World, 0.126 AU, and the centuries spent terraforming the planet have produced a world high on the adaptive Solmev scale. But, as De Sawyer and his men discover upon being ferried to the planet by their Pax escort, the terraforming has been very successful indeed. Barnard's World had suffered very much from the Ouster Swarm invasion preceding the fall, and very little, relatively speaking, from the fall itself. The world had been a pleasant contradiction in terms in web days, overwhelmingly agricultural, growing mostly Old Earth imports such as corn, wheat, soybeans, and the like, but also profoundly intellectual, boasting hundreds of the finest small colleges in the web. The combination of agricultural backwater, life on Barnard's World tended to imitate small-town life in North America circa 1900, and intellectual hotspot had brought some of the hegemony's finest scholars, writers, and thinkers there. After the fall, Barnard's World relied more upon its agricultural heritage than its intellectual prowess. When the Pax arrived in force some 5 decades after the fall, its brand of born-again Christianity and Pacham-based government was resisted for some years. Barnard's World had been self-sufficient and wished to remain that way. It was not formally accepted into the Pax until the year of our Lord 3061, some 212 years after the fall, and then only after bloody civil war between the Catholics and partisan bands loosely grouped under the name the Free Believers. Now, as De Sawyer learns during his brief tour with Archbishop Herbert Stern, the many colleges lie empty or have been converted to seminaries for the young men and women of Barnard's World. The partisans have all but disappeared, although there is still some resistance in the wild forest and canyon areas along the river known as Turkey Run. Turkey Run had been part of the river Tethys, and it is precisely there that Desoya and his men wish to go. On their 5th day in system, they travel there with a protective guard of 60 Pax troopers and some of the Archbishop's own elite guard. They meet no partisans. This bit of the Tethys runs through broad valleys, under high shale cliffs, through deciduous forests of old earth transplanted trees, and emerges into what has long since become tilled land, mostly cornfields sprinkled with the occasional white farmhouse and outbuildings. It does not look like a place of violence to Desoya, and he encounters none there. The Pax skimmers search the forest well for any sign of the girl's ship, but they find none. The river of Turkey Run is too shallow to hide a ship. Major Andy Ford, the Pax officer in charge of their search, calls it the sweetest canoeing river this side of Sugar Creek, and the section of River Tethys had been only a few clicks long here. Barnard's world has modern atmosphere and orbital traffic control, and no ship could have left the area without being tracked. Interviews with farmers in the Turkey Run area produce no talk of strangers. In the end, Pax military, the Archbishop's diocesan council, and local civil authorities pledge constant surveillance of the area, despite any threat of free believer harassment. On their 8th day, Desoya and his men take leave of scores of people who can only be referred to as newfound friends, rise to orbit, transfer to a Pax torch ship, and are escorted back to the deep-orbit Barnard Star garrison and their Archangel ship. The last sight Desoya glimpses of the bucolic world is the twin spires of the giant cathedral rising in the capital of St. Thomas, formerly known as Bussard City. Bussard as in the ramjet, as opposed to carrion bird. Swinging away from the direction of Old Earth system now, Desoya, Gregorius, Key, and Rettig awaken in system Lakai 9352, about as far from Old Earth as Tau Ceti had been to the early seed ships. Here, the delay is neither bureaucratic nor military, but environmental. The web world here, known as Sibiatu's Bitterness and then renamed Inevitable Grace by its current population of a few thousand Pax colonists, had been environmentally marginal then and is far below that now. The river Tethys had run under 12 kilometers of Perspex tunnel, holding in breathable air and pressure. Those runnels had fallen into decay more than 2 centuries ago, the water boiling away into the low pressure, the thin methane-ammonia atmosphere of the planet rushing in to fill the empty riverbanks and shattered Perspex tubes. Desoya has no idea why the web would have included this rock in the river Tethys. Desoya has no idea why the web would have included this rock in its river Tethys. There is no Pax military garrison here, nor serious church presence other than chaplains living with the highly religious colonists eking out a living with their bauxite mines and sulfur pits, but Desoya and his men convince some of these colonists to take them to the former river.
If she came this way, she died,
says Gregorius as he inspects the huge portals hanging over a straight line of ruined perspex and dry riverbeds. The methane wind blows, and grains of ever-shifting dust try to find their way through the men's atmosphere suits. Not if she stayed in the ship, says Desoya, turning ponderously in his suit to look up at the orange-yellow sky. The colonists wouldn't have noticed the ship leaving. It's too far from the colony. The grizzled man with them, a bent figure even in his worn and sandblasted suit, grunts behind his visor.
That be true, Father. We in Denegay Oh my God, what the hell?
That be true. We in Denegay outsaid stargazing too often, be true.
They be true, Father. We in Denegay outsaid a stargazing too often, be true.
Desoya and his men discuss the futility of ordering Pax troops to this sort of world to watch for the girl in the months and years to come.
It's a fact it'll be a god-awful miserable... Oh, sorry. It's a fact that it'll be god-awful miserable us end-of-nowhere duty, sir, says Gregorius. Pardon the language, father.
Desoya nods distractedly. They have left the last of the motion sensor beacons there, 5 worlds explored out of 200, and he is running out of material. The thought of sending troops back here depresses him as well, but he can see little alternative. Besides the resurrection ache and emotional confusion coursing through him constantly now, there is growing depression and doubt. He feels like an ancient blind cat sent to catch a mouse, but unable to watch and guard 200 mouse holes simultaneously. Not for the first time does he wish he were in the outback, fighting ousters. As if reading the Father Captain's thoughts, Gregorius says,
Sir, have you really looked at the itinerary Raphael's set for us?
Yes, Sergeant. Why?
Some of the places we're headed ain't ours anymore, Captain. It's not till the later part of the trip, World's Way in the outback, but the ship wants to take us to planets that have been overrun by the ousters long ago, sir.
Desoya nods tiredly. I know, Sergeant. I didn't specify battle areas or the Great Wall defensive zones when I told the ship's computer to plan the trip.
There's 18 worlds that would be a bit dicey to visit, says Gregorius with the hint of a grin, seeing as how the ousters own 'em now.
Desoya nods again, but says nothing. It is Corporal Key who says softly, If you want to go look there, sir, we'll be more than happy to go with you. The priest captain looks up at the faces of the 3 men. He has taken their loyalty and presence too much for granted, he thinks. Thank you, he says simply. We'll decide when we get to that part of the tour.
Which may be about 100 standard years from now at this rate, says Rettig.
It may indeed, says Desoya. Let's strap in and get the hell out of here. They translate out of the system. Still in the old neighborhood, that's with a capital O and a capital N, still in the old neighborhood, hardly out of Earth's pre-Hegera backyard, they jump to 2 heavily terraformed worlds spinning through their complicated choreography in the half-light-year space between Epsilon Eridani and Epsilon Indi. The Omicron Subtext 2 Epsilon Subtext 3 Eurasian habitation experiment had been a bold pre-Hegera utopian effort to achieve against-all-odds terraforming and political perfection, primarily neo-Marxist, on hostile worlds while fleeing from hostile forces. It had failed miserably. The hegemony had replaced the utopians with force space bases and automated refueling stations, but the press of outback-bound seed ships and then spin ships passing through the old neighborhood region during the Hegera had led to successful terraforming of these 2 dark worlds spinning between the dim Epsilon Eridani sun and the dimmer Epsilon Indi star. Then the famous defeat of Glennon Heights' fleet there had sealed the twin systems' fame and military importance. The Pax had rebuilt the abandoned force bases, regenerated the failing terraform systems. Desoya's searching of these 2 river sections is dry and businesslike in a military way. Each of the Tethys segments is so deep in a military reservation area that it soon becomes obvious there is no chance that the girl, much less the ship, could have passed through in the past 2 months without being detected and run to ground. Desoya had surmised this from knowing about the Epsilon system. He has passed through there several times himself on his travels to the Great Wall and beyond, but had decided that he needed to see the portals for himself. It is good that they both encounter this garrison system at this time. It is good that they encounter this garrison system at this time in their travels, however, for both Key and Rettig are hospitalized. Engineers and church resurrection specialists examine Raphael in dry dock and determine that there are minute but serious errors in the automated resurrection crash. 3 standard days are spent in making repairs. When they translate out of the system this time, with only one more stop in the old neighborhood before moving into the post-Hedgera reaches of the old web, it is with the earnest hope that their health, depression, and emotional instability will be improved if they have to undergo automated resurrection again. "Where are you headed now?" asks Father Demetrius, the resurrection specialist who has helped them over the past days. Desoya hesitates only a second before answering. It cannot compromise his mission if he tells the elderly priest of this one fact. "Mare Infinitus," he says, "is a water world some 3 parsecs outward bound and 2 light years above the plane of—" "Ah, yes," says the old priest. "I had a mission there decades ago, weaning the indigene fisherfolk from their paganism and bringing them into Christ's light." The white-haired priest raises his hand in a benediction. "Whatever you seek, Father Captain Desoya, it is my sincere prayer that you find it there." Desoya almost leaves Mare Infinitus before sheer chance brings him the clue he has been seeking. It is their 63rd day of seeking, only the 2nd day since resurrection in their creches aboard the orbital Pax station, and the first of what should be the last 3 days on the planet. A talkative young man named Lieutenant Baron Alan Sproul is Desoya's liaison from Pax 70 Ophiuchi A Fleet Command, and like tour guides throughout history, the youngster gives Desoya and his troopers more background than they want to hear. But he is a good thopter pilot, and on this ocean world, in a flying machine that is relatively unfamiliar to him, Desoya is pleased to be passenger rather than pilot, and he relaxes some while Sproul takes them south, away from the extensive floating city of St. Therese, and into the empty fishing areas where the farcasters still float.
"Why are the portals so far apart here?" asks Gregorius.
"Ah, well," says Lieutenant Sproul, "there's a story to that." Desoya catches his sergeant's eye. Gregorius almost never smiles unless combat is imminent, but Desoya has grown familiar with a certain glint in the big man's eye that is the sergeant's equivalent of riotous laughter. "So the hegemony wanted to build its River Tethys portals out here, in addition to the orbital sphere they had and all the little farcasters they set up everywhere. Sort of a silly idea, isn't it, sir? Putting part of a river through the ocean here. Anyway, they wanted it out in the mid-littoral current, which makes some sense because it's where the leviathans and some of the more interesting canths are, if the web tourists wanted to see fish, that is. But the problem is, well, it's pretty obvious." Desoya looks over to where Corporal Key is dozing in the warm sunlight coming through his thopter blister. "It's pretty obvious that there's nothing permanent to build something big like those portals on, and you'll see 'em in a minute, sir. They're big. Well, I mean, there are the coral rings, but they're not secured to anything. They float, and the yellow kelp islands, but they're not... I mean, you put a foot on 'em, it goes right through, if you know what I mean, sir. There, to the starboard side, sir. That's yellow kelp. Don't get too much of it this far south. Anyway, what the old hegemony engineers did is, they rigged the portals sort of like we've been doing with the platforms in cities for the last 500 years, sir. That is, they run these foundation bases a couple of 100 fathoms. Big, heavy things they've got to be, sir. And then run big bladed drag anchors out on the cables beneath that. But the bottom of the ocean here is sort of a problematic thing, usually 10,000 fathoms at least. That's where the big granddaddies of our surface canths like Lantern Mouth live, sir. Monsters down that deep, sir. Clicks long."
"Lieutenant," says Desoya, "what does this have to do with why the portals are so far apart?"
The high, almost ultrasonic hum of the thopter's dragonfly wings are threatening to put the priest captain to sleep. Key is now snoring, and Rettig has his feet up and his eyes closed. It has been a long flight. Sproul grins. "Getting to that, sir. You see, with those keel weights and 20 clicks of cable trailing to rock, our cities and platforms don't go very far, even in the big tide season. No, sir. But these portals, well, we have lots of submarine volcanic activity on Mare I, sir. Whole different ecology down there, believe me.
Some of them tube worms would give those gigacants a battle, honestly, sir. Anyway, the old Web Days engineers fixed those portals so that if their keel weights and cables sensed volcanic activity under them, they just, well, migrate, sir, is the best word I can think of. So, says DeSoya, the distance between the River Tethys portals has widened because of volcanic activity on the ocean floor? Yes, sir, says Lieutenant Sproul with a wide grin that seems to suggest both pleasure and amazement that a fleet officer can comprehend such a thing. And there's one of them now, sir, says the liaison officer with a flourish, banking the Thopter into a descending spiral. He brings the machine into a hover just a few meters above the ancient arch. 20 meters below that, the violet sea churns and splashes against the rusted metal at the portal's base. DeSoya rubs his face. None of them can throw off the fatigue any longer. Perhaps if they had a few more days between resurrection and death. Can we see the other portal now, please? He says. Yes, sir. The Thopter buzzes just meters above the waves as it covers the 200 clicks to the next arch. DeSoya does doze, and when he wakes to the lieutenant's gentle nudging, the second portal arch is visible against the sea. It is late afternoon, and the low sun throws a long shadow on the violet sea. Very good, says DeSoya. And the deep radar searches are still being carried out? Yes, sir, says the young pilot. They're widening the big search... They're widening the... That's right, transpose words from the line below. It's real clever. They're widening the search radius, but so far they haven't seen anything but some hellacious big lantern mouths. That gets the sport fishing guys worked up, I can tell you.
That's a major industry here, I take it, sir, rumbles Gregorius from his place on the jump seat behind the pilot.
Yes, Sergeant, says Sproul, craning his long neck around to look at the bigger man. With kelp harvesting way down, it's our biggest off-world source of income.
DeSoya points to a platform only a few kilometers away. Another fishing and refueling platform? The priest captain has spent a day with the Pax commanders going over reports from small outposts like this all over the world. None have reported any contact with a ship or sight of a child. During this long flight south to the portals, they have passed dozens of similar platforms.
Yes, sir, says Sproul. Shall I hover for a while, or have you seen enough?
DeSoya looks at the portal, arching high above them now as the Thopter hovers meters above the sea, and says, We can go back, Lieutenant. We have a formal dinner with Bishop Melandriano tonight. Let's try that again. We can get back, Lieutenant. We have a formal dinner with Bishop Melandriano tonight. Sproul's eyebrows rise toward his crew cut.
Yes, sir,
bringing the Thopter up and around in a final circle before heading back north. That platform looks as if it's been damaged recently, says DeSoya, leaning farther to his right to look down from the blister port.
Yes, sir, agrees the lieutenant. I have a friend who just rotated in from that Station 326 Mid-Littoral, it's called, sir, and he told me about it. They had a poacher try to blow up the place a few tides ago.
Sabotage? Says DeSoya, watching the platform recede. Guerrilla war, says the lieutenant. The poachers are the indigenes from back before the Pax got here, sir. That's why we've got troopers on each of the plats and regular patrol ships during the height of the fishing season. We have to keep the fishing ships sort of herded there, sir, so the poachers don't attack them. You saw the boats tied up, sir. Well, it's almost time for them to go fishing. Our Pax ships will escort them out. The lantern mouth, well, sir, he rises up just when the moons are just so. You see the big one rising there, sir. So the legal fishing ships, they have these bright lights they shine when the moons are down, luring the big canths up. But the poachers do that too, sir. DeSoya looks out at the empty expanse of ocean between the Thopter and the northern horizon. Doesn't seem like too many places for rebels to hide, he says. No, sir, says the lieutenant. Yes, sir. Actually, they've got fishing boats camouflaged to look like yellow kelp isles, submersibles, even one big submarine harvester that was rigged up like a lantern mouth, believe it or not, sir. And that platform was damaged by a poacher attack? Says DeSoya, speaking to stay awake now. The drone of the Thopter wings is deadly. Right, sir, says Lieutenant Sproul. About 8 big tides ago, one man, which is unusual. The poachers generally come in groups. He blew up some skimmers and thopters, common tactics, though they usually go for the boats.
Excuse me, Lieutenant, says DeSoya. You say this was 8 big tides ago. Could you translate that into standard?
Sproul chews his lip. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. I grew up on Mare, and, well, 8 big tides is about 2 standard months ago, sir.
Was the poacher apprehended?
Yes, sir, says Sproul with his youthful grin. Well, actually, there's a story there, sir. The lieutenant glances at the priest captain to see if he should go on. Well, to make it short, sir, this poacher got apprehended first, then he blew his charges and tried to get away, and then he was shot and killed by the guards. DeSoya nods and closes his eyes. In the last day, he has reviewed over 100 reports on poacher incidents spread over the past 2 standard months. Blowing up platforms and killing poachers seems to be the second most popular sport, after fishing, on Mare Infinitus. Funny thing about this guy, says the lieutenant, finishing his story, is how he tried to get away. Some sort of old flying carpet from the hegemony days. DeSoya snaps awake. He glances at the sergeant and his men. All 3 are sitting up, staring at him.
Turn around, snaps Father Captain DeSoya. Take us back to that platform.
And then what happened? Says DeSoya for the 5th time. He and his Swiss guard are in the platform director's office on the highest point of the platform, just beneath the radar dish. Outside the long window, 3 unbelievable moons are rising. The director, a PAX captain in the Ocean Command named C. Dobbs Powell, is overweight, florid, and sweating heavily.
When it became apparent that this man was not in either of the fishing groups we had on board that night, Lieutenant Belius took him aside for further questioning. Standard procedure, Father Captain.
DeSoya stares at the man.
And then?
The director licks his lips.
And then the man managed to escape temporarily, Father Captain. There was a struggle on the upper walkway. He pushed Lieutenant Belius into the sea.
Was the lieutenant recovered?
No, Father Captain. He almost certainly drowned, although there was quite a bit of rainbow shark activity that night.
Describe the man you had in custody before you lost him, interrupts DeSoya, emphasizing the word lost.
Young, Father Captain, maybe 25 or so standard, and tall, sir, real big young guy.
You saw him yourself?
Oh, yes, Father Captain. I was out on the walkway with Lieutenant Belius and Sea Lancer Ament when the fellow started the fight and pushed Belius through the railing.
And then got away from you and the Lance Private, says DeSoya flatly, with both of you armed and this man, did you say he was handcuffed?
Yes, Father Captain.
Captain Powell mops his forehead with a moist handkerchief. Did you notice anything unusual about this young man? Anything else that did not make it into your, extremely brief action report to command headquarters? The director puts the handkerchief away, then pulls it out again to mop his neck.
No, Father Captain. During the struggle, the man's sweater was torn a bit in front. Enough for me to notice that he wasn't like you and me, Father Captain.
DeSoya raises an eyebrow.
I mean, he wasn't of the cross.
Powell hurries on.
No cruciform. Course, I didn't think much of that at the time. Most of these indigene poachers have never been baptized. Wouldn't be poachers if they had now, would they?
DeSoya ignores the question. Pacing closer to the seated, sweating captain, he says, So the man swung down under the main catwalk and escaped that way?
Didn't escape, sir, says Powell. Just got to this flying dingus that he must have hidden there. I'd set off the alarm, of course. The whole garrison turned out just like they was drilled to do.
But this man got the dingus flying and off the platform?
Yes,
says the platform director, mopping his brow again and obviously thinking of his future, or lack of it.
But just for a minute, we saw him on radar, and then we saw him with our night goggles. That rug could fly, all right, but when we opened up on it, it come swinging back around toward the platform.
How high was it then, Captain Prowl?
High?
The director furrows his sweaty brow.
I guess about 25, 30 meters above the water then. About level with our main deck. He was coming right at us, Father Captain. Like he was going to bomb the platform from a flying rug. Of course, in a way he did. I mean, the charges he'd planted went off right then. Scared the shit out of me. Excuse me, Father.
Go on, says DeSoya. He looks at Gregorius, where the big man is standing at parade rest behind the director. From the expression on the sergeant's face, he would be happy to garrote the sweating captain in a second.
Well, it was quite an explosion, sir. Fire control team started running toward the blast, but Sea Lancer Ament and some of the other sentries and I stayed at our post there at the North Catwalk.
Very commendable, mutters DeSoya, the irony audible in his voice. Go on.
Well, Father Captain, there's not much more,
the sweating man says lamely. You gave the order to fly at the flying man?
Yes, sir.
And all of the sentries fired at once, upon your order?
Yeah,
says the director, his eyes glazed with the effort to remember.
I think they all fired. There were 6 of them besides Ament and me.
And you also fired? Pressed DeSoya.
Well, yeah, the station was under attack. The flight deck was a burning mess, and this terrorist was flying at us carrying God knows what.
DeSoya nods as if unconvinced. Did you see anything or anyone on the flying mat other than the one man?
Well, no, says Powell, but it was dark.
DeSoya looks out the window at the rising moons. Brilliant orange light floods through the panes. Were the moons up that night, Captain? Powell licks his lips again as if tempted to lie. He knows that DeSoya and his men have interviewed Sea Lancer Ament and the others, and DeSoya knows he knows.
They'd just risen,
he mumbles. So the amount of light was comparable to this? Says DeSoya.
Yeah.
Did you see anyone or anything else on that flying device, Captain? A package, a backpack, anything that might be construed to be a bomb?
No, says Powell, anger moving under the surface of his fear now. But it only took a handful of plastique to blow up 2 of our patrol skimmers and 3 thopters, Father Captain.
Very true, says DeSoya. Pacing to the brilliantly lit window, he says, Your 7 sentries, Sea Lancer Ament included, were they all carrying flechette guns, Captain?
Yes.
And you yourself carried a flechette pistol, is that right?
Yes.
And did all of these flechette charges strike the suspect? Powell hesitates, then shrugs.
I think most of them did.
And did you see the result? DeSoya asks softly.
It shredded the bastard, sir,
says Powell, anger winning over fear for the time being.
I saw bits of him fly apart like gull shit hitting a fan, sir. Then he dropped. Nah, he flew backward off that stupid carpet like someone being yanked by a cable. Fell into the sea right next to Pylon L3. Rainbow sharks, they came up and started feeding within 10 seconds.
So you did not recover the body? Says DeSoya. Powell looks up with defiance in his eyes.
Oh, no. We recovered it, Father Captain. I had Ament and Kilmer sweep up what was left with the boat hooks, gaffs, and a hand net. That was after we'd put the fire out and I'd made sure there was no further danger to the platform.
Captain Powell was beginning to sound confident of his own correctness. DeSoya nods. And where is that body now, Captain? The director steeples his pudgy fingers. They are shaking only slightly.
We buried it. At sea, of course. Off the south dock that next morning. Brought up a whole school of rainbow sharks and we shot some for dinner.
But you are satisfied that the body was that of the suspect you had put under arrest earlier? Powell's tiny eyes become even smaller as he squints at DeSoya.
Yeah, what was left of him. Just a poacher. That kind of shit happens all the time out here on the Big Violet, Father Captain.
And do poachers fly ancient EM flying carpets out here all the time on the Big Violet, Captain Powell? The director's face freezes.
Is that what that dingus was?
You did not mention the carpet in your report, Captain. Powell shrugs.
That didn't seem important.
DeSoya nods. And you say now that the dingus just kept going? That it overflew the deck and catwalk and disappeared out at sea? Empty?
Yes,
says Captain Powell, pulling himself erect in the chair and straightening his wilted uniform. DeSoya whirls around. Sea Lancer Ament says otherwise, Captain. Lancer Ament says that the carpet was recovered, that it was deactivated, and that it was last seen in your custody. Is this true?
No,
says the director, looking from DeSoya to Gregorius to Sproul to Key to Rettig and then back to DeSoya.
No, I never saw it after it flew past us. Ament's a fucking liar.
DeSoya nods to Sergeant Gregorius. To Powell, he says, such an ancient artifact in working order would be worth quite a bit of money, even on Mare Infinitus, would it not, Captain?
I don't know,
managed Powell, who is watching Gregorius. The sergeant has walked over to the director's private cabinet. It is made of heavy steel, and it is locked.
I don't even know what the damned thing was,
adds Powell. DeSoya is standing at the window now. The largest moon fills the entire eastern sky. The farcaster arch is quite visible, silhouetted against the moon. It is called a hawking mat, he says softly, almost in a whisper, in a place called the Valley of the Time Tombs. It would have made just the right sort of radar signature. He nods at Sergeant Gregorius. The Swiss Guard noncom smashes open the steel cabinet with one blow of his gauntleted hand. Reaching in, he brushes aside boxes, papers, stacks of currency, and comes out with a rug, carefully folded. He carries it over to the director's desk. Arrest this man and get him out of my sight, Father Captain DeSoya says softly. Lieutenant Sproul and Corporal Key lead the protesting director from the office. DeSoya and Gregorius unroll the hawking mat on the long desktop. The carpet's ancient flight threads still glow gold in the moonlight. DeSoya touches the forward edge of the artifact, feeling the cuts and torn places where flechettes have ripped the fabric. There is blood everywhere, obscuring the ornate designs, dulling the glow of the threads of superconducting monofilament. Shreds of what might be human flesh are caught in the short tassels in the back of the carpet. DeSoya looks up at Gregorius. Have you ever read the long poem called The Cantos, Sergeant?
The Cantos, sir? No, I'm not much for reading. Besides, ain't that on the list of forbidden books, sir?
I believe it is, Sergeant, says Father Captain DeSoya. He moves away from the bloodied hawking mat and looks out at the rising moons and the silhouetted arch. This is a piece of the puzzle, he is thinking, and when the puzzle is complete, I will have you, child. I believe it is on the forbidden list, Sergeant, he says again. I believe it is on the forbidden list, Sergeant, he says again. He turns quickly and heads for the door, gesturing for Rettig to roll the hawking mat and bring it along. Come, he says, putting more energy in his voice than he has had for weeks. We have work to do. And that's the end of the book. I mean, because Raul got killed. And he's the guy writing. So he died there. That's too bad. 33. My memory of the 20 minutes or so I spent in that large, bright mess hall is very much like those bad dreams we all have sooner or later. You know the ones I mean, where we find ourselves in some place when we find ourselves in some place out of our past, but cannot remember our reason for being there or the names of the people around us.
When the lieutenant and his 2 troopers walked me into the mess hall, everything in the room was tinged with that nightmare displacement of the formerly familiar. I say familiar because I had spent a good part of my 27 years in hunting camps and military mess halls, casino bars, and galleys of old barges. I was familiar with the company of men. Too familiar, I might have said then, for the elements I sensed in this room. Bluster, braggadocio, the sweat-scented ointment of city-nervous men in the throes of adventure-bound male bonding, had long since grown tiresome to me. But now that familiarity was offset by strangeness, the smattering of dialect-laden speech I could hear, the subtle differences in clothing, the smell of cigarettes actually being used, and the knowledge that I would give myself away almost immediately if there was any need to deal with their currency, culture, or conversation. There was a tall coffee urn on the farthest table. I had never been in a mess hall without one, and I ambled over there, trying to look casual as I did so, found a cup that was relatively clean, and poured myself some coffee. All the while I was watching the lieutenant and his 2 men watch me. When they seemed comfortable that I belonged there, they turned and went out. I sipped terrible coffee, noted idly that my hand holding the cup was not shaking despite the hurricane of emotions inside me, and tried to decide what to do next. Amazingly, I still had my weapons, sheath knife and pistol, and my radio. With the radio, I could detonate the plastique at any time and make a run for the hawking mat during the confusion. Now that I had seen the pack's sentinels, I knew that there would have to be some sort of diversion if the raft was going to get by this platform without being seen. I walked to the window. It looked the direction we had been thinking of as north, but I could see the eastern sky aglow with imminent moonrise. The farcaster arch was visible to the naked eye. I tried the window, but it was either locked in some form I could not see or nailed in place. There was a corrugated steel roof of another module just a meter or so below the window level, but there seemed no way I could get to it from here.
Who you with, son?
I turned quickly. 5 men had come over from the nearest group, and it was the shortest and fattest who was speaking to me. The man wore outdoor garb, checked flannel shirt, canvas trousers, canvas vest not too dissimilar from mine, and a fish-scaling knife on his belt. I realized then that the pack's troopers might have seen the tip of my holster poking out from under my vest, but assumed it to be one of these knife sheaths. This man had also spoken in dialect, but one quite different from the pack's guards outside. The fishermen, I remembered, were probably off-worlders, so my strange accent should not be overly suspicious. "Klingman," I said, taking another sip of the sludge-tasting coffee. The one word had worked on the pack's troopers. It did not work on these men. They looked at each other a moment, and then the fat one spoke again.
We came with the Klingman party, boy, all the way from St. Therese. You weren't on the hydrofoil. What's your game?"
I grinned. "No game," I said. I was supposed to be with the group. Missed it in St. Therese. Came on down with the otters. I still hadn't got it right. The 5 men spoke among themselves. I heard the word poachers several times. 2 of the men left and went out the door. The fat man poked a fat finger at me.
"I was sitting over there with the otter guide. He never seen you before either. You stay right there, son."
That was the one thing I was not going to do. Setting my cup on the table, I said, "No, you wait here. I'm going to go get the lieutenant and have a few things straightened out. Don't move." This seemed to befuddle the fat man, and he stayed in his place as I crossed the now silent mess hall, opened the door, and stepped out onto the catwalk. There was nowhere to go. To my right, the 2 pack's troopers with flechette guns had snapped to attention at the railing. On my left, the thin lieutenant I'd bumped into earlier was hurrying down the walkway with the 2 civilians and what looked to be a pudgy pack's captain in tow. "Damn," I said aloud. Sub-vocalizing, I said, "Kiddo, I'm in trouble here. They may have me. I'll leave the external mic open so you can hear. Head straight for the portal. Don't answer." The last thing I needed during this conversation was a tiny voice chirping out of my ear plug. "Hey," I said, stepping forward toward the captain and raising my hands as if I was going to shake his. "You're just the man I was looking for."
"That's him," cried one of the two fishermen. "He didn't come in with us or the other group. It's one of them cross-dam poachers you've been telling us about."
"Cuff him,"
said the captain to the lieutenant, and before I could do anything clever, the troopers had grabbed me from behind, and the thin officer had slapped handcuffs on me. They were the old-fashioned metal kind, but they worked quite well, locking my wrists almost together and all but cutting off circulation. I realized at that instant that I would never make it as a spy. Everything about my foray to the platform had been a disaster. The Pax troops were being sloppy. They were still crowding against me when they should have kept their distance and held their weapons on me while they searched me, and then cuffed me when I was disarmed, but the search would come in a few seconds. I decided not to give them those few seconds. Bringing my cuffed hands up quickly, I grabbed the soft, almost chubby little captain by the front of his shirt and threw him back into the two civilians. There was a moment of shouting and pushing during which I turned quickly, kicked the first gun-carrying trooper in the balls as hard as I could, and grabbed the second one by the weapon still slung over his shoulder. The trooper shouted and seized the weapon with both hands, just as I grabbed the sling and pulled down and to the right on it with all of my strength. The trooper went with the weapon, hit the wall with his bare head, and sat down very quickly. The first trooper, the one I'd kicked and who was still kneeling and holding his groin with one hand, reached up with his free hand and ripped my sweater all the way down the front, ripping my night goggles off my neck as he did so. I kicked him in the throat, and he went all the way down. The lieutenant had removed his flechette pistol by this time, realized that he could not shoot me without killing the two troopers behind me, and struck me on the head with the butt of the thing. Flechette pistols are not that heavy or substantial. This one made me see sparks behind my eyes for a moment and opened my scalp. It also made me angry. I turned around and hit the lieutenant in the face with my fists. He went back over the waist-high railing, arms flailing, and kept on going. Everyone froze for a second as the man screamed all the way down to the water, 25 meters below. I should say that everyone but I froze, for as the lieutenant's boot soles were still visible going over the railing, I had turned, leaped over the trooper on the floor, slammed open the screen door, and run into the mess hall. Men were milling around, most of them making toward the door and windows on this side to see what the commotion was, but they made way for me as I dodged through them like a deep brooder on a 53-man Squamish team herding the goat in for the goal. Behind me, I heard the door slamming open again, and the captain, or one of the troopers, shouting,
"Down! Out of the way! Look out!"
I could feel my shoulder blades hunching again at the thought of those thousands of flechette darts flying my way, but I did not slow as I leaped to a tabletop, covered my face with my still handcuffed wrists, and hit a window flying, my right shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Even while leaping, it crossed my mind that all it would take was for the window to be perspex or smart glass, and my misadventure would end in perfect farce. Me bouncing back into the mess hall to be shot or captured at the trooper's leisure. It would make sense for a platform way out here to use unbreakable material instead of glass. But it had felt like glass when I had set my fingers against it a few minutes earlier. It was glass. I hit the corrugated steel of the roof and just kept rolling downhill, shards of glass flying around me and crunching beneath me. I brought part of the window's muntin with me. Broken wood and glass was stuck to my vest and tattered sweater. But I didn't slow to disentangle myself. At the end of the roof I had a choice. Instinct made me want to keep rolling over the edge, get out of sight before those gunmen opened up behind me, and hope that there was another catwalk below. Logic made me want to stop and check it out before rolling over. Memory suggested that there were no catwalks along this north edge of the platform. I compromised by rolling off the edge of the roof but grabbing the overhang as I did so, peering down between my swinging boots as my fingers slipped. There was no deck or platform down there, just 20 meters of air between my boots and the violet waves. The moons were rising, and the sea was coming alive with light. I levered myself up far enough to look back at the window I'd broken through, saw the gunmen milling there, and dropped my head out of sight just as one of them fired. The flechette cloud went slightly high, missing my straining fingers by 2 or 3 centimeters, and I flinched as I listened to the angry bee hum of thousands of steel needles flying past. There was no deck below me, but I could see a pipe running horizontally along the side of the module. It was 6 or 8 centimeters across. There was the narrowest of gaps between the inside of the pipe and the wall of the module, perhaps wide enough for my fingers to find a grip, if the pipe did not break under my weight, if the shock did not dislocate my shoulders, if my handcuffed hands did not fail, if... I did not think. I dropped. My forearms and the steel of my handcuffs slammed into the pipe, almost flipping me backward, but my fingers were ready to grip, and they did so, sliding upward along the inside of the pipe, but then holding my weight. The second burst of flechette fire above me blew the roof overhang to shreds and perforated the outer wall in 100 places. Splinters and steel shards tumbled past in the moonlight as the men shouted and cursed up there. I heard footsteps on the roof. I was shuffling and swinging to my left as quickly as I could. There was a deck protruding below the corner of the module down there, at least 3 meters below me and 4 or 5 meters to the east. The progress was maddeningly slow. My shoulders were shrieking with discomfort. My fingers were becoming numb from lack of circulation. I could feel glass shards in my hair and scalp, and blood was running into my eyes. The men above me were going to get to the edge of the roof before I could get to a point above the platform. Suddenly there was cursing and shouting, and a section of the roof caved in right where I had been hanging. Evidently, their flechette fire had undermined that section of roofing, and now their weight was adding to the problem. I could hear them shoving back, cursing, and finding alternate routes to the edge. This delay only gave me an extra 8 to 10 seconds, but it was enough to allow me to shuffle my hands to the end of the pipe, swing my body once, twice, release on the third swing, and fall heavily to the platform below, rolling up against the east railing hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I knew that I could not lie there and get my wind back. I moved quickly, rolling toward the darker section of deck under the module. At least 2 flechette guns fired, one missing and roiling the waters 15 meters below, the other pounding the end of the deck like 100 nail guns firing at once. I rolled to my feet and ran, ducking low beams and trying to see amid the maze of shadows down there. Footsteps pounded somewhere above me. They had the advantage of knowing the layout of these decks and stairways, but only I knew where I was headed. I was headed to the easternmost and lowest deck, where I had left the mat, but this maintenance deck had opened onto a long catwalk that ran north and south. When I had cut far enough under the main platform that I thought I would be even with the east deck, I swung up onto a support beam. It was about 6 centimeters wide, and, handcuffed arms flailing left and then right for balance, crossed an open section to the next vertical post. I did this again, shifting north and south when the beams ended, but always finding another beam running east. Trapdoors were flying open, and footsteps pounded on the main catwalk beneath the main deck. The main catwalks beneath the main deck, but I reached the eastern deck first. I jumped to it, found the mat where I had lashed it to the post, unrolled it, tapped the flight threads, and was up and flying over the railing just as the trapdoor opened above the long flight of stairs coming down to the deck. I was lying prone on the carpet, trying to make the least silhouette I could against the moons or glowing waves, tapping flight threads clumsily because of the handcuffs. My instinct was to fly due north, but I realized that this would be a mistake. The flechette guns would be accurate only to 60 or 70 meters out, but someone up there must have a plasma rifle or the equivalent. All the attention had rushed to the east end of the platform now. My best chance was to head west, perhaps even south. I banked left, swooped beneath the support beams there, and skipped just above the waves, heading west under the protective edge of the platform. Only the one deck protruded out this far, the one I'd dropped onto, and I could see that it was empty at the north end. No, not empty, I realized, just shot to bits from the flechette fire and probably too dangerous to stand on. I flew under it and headed west. There were boot sounds on the upper catwalks, but anyone catching a glimpse of me would have a hell of a rough time lining up a shot because of the dozens of pylons and cross-girders here. I swooped out from under the platform into the shadow of it. The moons were higher now, and stayed just millimeters above the wave-tops, staying low, trying to keep the long ocean swell between me and the western end of the platform. I was 50 or 60 meters out and almost ready to breathe a sigh of relief when I heard the splashing and coughing a few meters to my right, just beyond the next swell. I knew instantly what it was, who it was. The lieutenant I had slugged and sent sprawling over the railing. My impulse was to keep on flying. The platform behind me was a mass of confusion at this point. Men shouting, others shooting off the north side, more men screaming at the east end where I had slipped away. But no one had seen me out here. This man had struck me in the head with his flechette pistol and would happily have killed me if his pals hadn't been in the way. The fact that the current had pulled him out here away from the platform was his bad luck. There was nothing I could do about it. I can drop him off at the base of the platform, perhaps on one of the support beams. I got away once this way. I can do it again. The man was doing his job. He does not deserve to die for it. It is fair to say that I hated my conscience at moments like that. Not that I had many moments like that. I stopped the hawking mat just above the waves. I was still lying on my belly, my head and shoulders hunched low so that the shouting men on the platform would not spot me. Now I leaned out and to the right to see if I could spot the source of the coughing and splashing. I saw the fish first. They had dorsals like hollows I'd seen of old Earth sharks, or the cannibal saberbacks of Hyperion's South Sea, but two shining dorsal fins rather than one. I could see the fish clearly in the moonlight. They seemed to glitter a dozen bright colors, from the twin dorsal fins to their long bellies. They were about 3 meters long, they moved like predators with powerful surges of their tails, and their teeth were very white. Following one of these killers over the swell toward the coughing sounds, I saw the lieutenant. He was splashing and struggling to keep his head above water, all the while pivoting, trying to keep the multicolored killer fish at bay. One of the twin dorsaled things would lunge toward him through the violet water, and the lieutenant would kick at it, trying to strike its head or fin with his boot. The fish would snap and then wheel away. Others were circling closer. The pack's officer was obviously exhausted. "Damn," I whispered. There was no way I could leave him there. The first thing I did was tap the code that killed the deflection field, that low-scale containment field designed to keep the wind out at high speeds and the hawking mat occupants, especially children, from tumbling off at any speed. If I was going to be pulling this waterlogged man aboard, I did not want to have to struggle against the EM field. Then I slid the mat down the long swell toward him, bringing it to a halt right where he had been. He was no longer there. The man had slipped under. I considered diving for him, then saw the pale forms of his arms struggling just under the waves. The shark things were circling closer, but not attacking at the moment. Perhaps the shadow of the hawking mat disconcerted them. I reached down with both manacled arms, found his right wrist, and pulled him up. His weight almost tumbled me off the mat, but I leaned back, found my balance, and tugged him up far enough that I could grab the back of his pants and haul him, dripping, coughing water, onto the hawking mat. The lieutenant was pale and cold, shaking all over, but after an initial bout of retching up seawater, he seemed to be breathing all right. I was glad for that. I was not sure my generosity would go so far as administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Making sure that he was sprawled on the mat far enough that one of the passing dorsal fish wouldn't leap up and take one of his legs off, I turned my attention back to the controls. I set a course back to the platform, rising slightly as we went. Fumbling in my vest, I found the comm unit and keyed in the code needed to detonate the plastique I had planted on the skimmer and thopter decks. We would approach the platform
from the south, where I could make sure those decks were clear of people. I would then transmit the detonate code with a simple push of the button, and, in the ensuing confusion, swing back around and come in from the west, dropping the lieutenant off at the first dry place I could find under there. I turned to see if the man was still breathing, and had an instant's glimpse of the Pax officer on one knee, something gleaming in his hand. He stabbed me in the heart. Or it would have been directly through my heart if I had not twisted in the split second it took for the knife to cut through my vest, sweater, and flesh. As it was, the short blade ripped into my side and grated against a rib. I did not feel pain at the moment so much as a shock, a literal electric shock. I gasped and grabbed for his wrist. The blade came in fast, higher this time, and my hands, slippery with seawater and my own blood, slipped back along his wrist. The best I could do was pull downward, using the band of metal connecting the manacles on my wrists to pull his arm down as he stabbed me again, a downward thrust this time that would have come in over the same rib and punctured my heart had it not been for my pull on his arm slowing the movement and the comm unit in my vest pocket deflecting the blade. Even so, I felt the blade rip at the flesh of my side again, and I staggered back, trying to get my footing on the rising hawking mat. I was dimly aware of the explosions at my back. The knife blade must have struck the transmit button. I did not turn to look as I found my balance, feet apart. The mat continued to rise. We were 8 or 10 meters above the ocean now, and still climbing. The lieutenant also leaped to his feet, falling into the natural crouch of a born knife fighter. I have always hated edged weapons. I have skinned animals and gutted innumerable fish. Even when I was in the guard, I could not understand how humans could do that to humans at close range. I had a knife on my belt somewhere, but I knew that I was no match for this man. My only hope was to get the automatic out of its holster, but it was a difficult movement. The pistol was on my left hip, turned backward so that I could draw across my body, but now I had to use both hands, fumble aside the hanging vest, pull up the flap over the weapon, pull it out, aim it. He slashed across my body, left to right. I jumped back to the very front of the hawking mat, but too late. The sharp little blade cut through flesh and muscle along the back of my right arm as I was reaching across my body for the pistol. I felt the pain of this cut and cried out. The lieutenant smiled. His teeth slick with seawater. Still crouching, knowing that I had nowhere to go, he took a half-step forward and swung the knife upward in an eviscerating arc that had to end in my belly. I had been turning to my right when he slashed me before. Now I kept the motion going and pushed off from the climbing hawking mat in a clean dive, my manacled hands directly in front of me as I broke the water 10 meters below. The ocean was salty and dark. I had not taken much of a breath before hitting the water, and for a terrible moment I literally did not know which way was up. Then I saw the glow of the 3 moons and kicked in that direction. My head cleared the surface in time to see the lieutenant still standing aboard the rising mat, now 30 meters closer to the platform and perhaps 25 meters high and rising. He was crouched and looking in my direction as if waiting for me to return so that he could finish the fight. I would not be returning, but I did want to finish the fight. Fumbling underwater for the automatic, I unsnapped the holster, pulled the heavy weapon out, and tried to float on my back so that I could aim the damned thing. My target was climbing and disappearing, but he was still silhouetted against the impossible moon as I thumbed back the hammer and steadied my arms. The lieutenant had just given up on me and turned toward the commotion on the platform when the men there fired. They beat me to it by a second or two. I doubt if I would have hit him at that distance. There was no way they could have missed. At least 3 flechette clusters struck him at once, knocking him back off the hawking mat like a load of laundry someone has tossed through the air. I literally saw moonlight through his riddled body as it tumbled down to the wavetops. A second later, one of the colored shark things cruised past me, actually bashing my shoulder aside in its eagerness to get to the mass of bleeding bait that had been the Pax lieutenant.
I floated there a second, watching the hawking mat until someone on the platform grabbed it. I had childishly hoped that the carpet would swoop around and come back to me, lift me out of the sea, and carry me back to the raft a click or two north of here now. I had grown fond of the hawking mat, fond of being part of the myth and legend it represented, and watching it fly away from me forever like that made me sick to my stomach. I was sick to my stomach. Between the wounds and the salt water I had ingested, not to mention the effect of salt water in the wounds, the nausea was real. I kept floating there in the salty sea, kicking to keep my head and shoulders above water, the heavy automatic held in my 2 hands. If I was going to swim, I had to shoot the handcuffs apart. But how could I do that? The steel band between the manacles was only a little longer than the thickness of my wrist. No matter how I contorted, I could not get the muzzle of the weapon around where I could sever the band with a bullet. Meanwhile, the dorsal fins were circling away from their feeding on the lieutenant. I knew that I was bleeding badly. I could feel the heavier wetness at my side and on the back of my arm, where the salty blood was spilling into the salty sea. If those things were anything like the saberbacks or sharks, they could sense blood for kilometers. My only hope was to kick toward the platform, use the pistol on the first fins to come near me, and hope I could reach one of the pylons and pull myself out or yell for help. That was my only hope. I leaned back, kicked, rolled onto my stomach, and started swimming north toward the open ocean. I had been on the platform once this long day. That was enough. Oh, hey, sorry I missed your message, Julius Harbison 1567. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you are enjoying. 34. I had never before tried swimming with my hands tied in front of me. It is my earnest hope that I never have to try it again. Only the strong salinity of this world's ocean kept me afloat as I kicked, floated, flailed, and thrashed my way north. I had no real hope of reaching the raft. The current began running strongest at least a click north of the platform, and our plan had been to keep the raft as far away from the structure as we could without losing the river within the sea. It was only a few minutes before the colored sharks began circling again. Their shimmering electric colors were visible beneath the waves, and when one moved in for the attack, I stopped trying to swim, floated, and kicked at its head in precisely the same way I had seen the late lieutenant hold the things at bay. It seemed to work. The fish were undoubtedly deadly, but they were stupid. They attacked one at a time, as if there was some unseen pecking order among them, and I kicked them in the snout, one at a time. But the process was exhausting. I had started to remove my boots just before the first color shark attack. The heavy leather was dragging me down, but the thought of kicking bare feet at those fanged, bullet-shaped heads made me keep the boots on as long as I could. I also decided that I could not swim with the pistol in my hands. The saber-back things were diving during their actual lunges at me, coming up from beneath. Seemed to be their preferred mode of attack, and I doubted whether a bullet from the old slug-thrower would do any good through a meter or two of water. Eventually, I tucked the pistol back into its holster, although I soon wished I had dropped it altogether. Floating, swiveling to keep twin dorsal fins in view, I finally pulled off my boots and let them slip away into the depths. When the next shark attacked, I kicked harder, feeling the sandpaper roughness of the skin above its tiny brain. It snapped at my bare feet, but moved away and began circling again. This is the way I swam north, pausing, floating, kicking, cursing, swimming a few meters, pausing again to twist in circles, waiting for the next attack. If it had not been for the combination of the brilliant moons and the saber-back thing's glowing skin, one of them would have pulled me down long before. As it was, I soon reached the point where I was too exhausted to try to swim any longer. All I could do was float on my back, gasp for air, and get my feet between those white teeth and my legs. every time I saw the colors flashing my way. Both the knife wounds were beginning to hurt in earnest now. I could feel the deeper slash along my ribs as a terrible burning combined with a stickiness down the length of my side. I was sure that I was bleeding into the water, and once, when the dorsal fins were circling far enough out that I could ignore them for a moment, I lowered my hands to my side and pulled them out of the water. They were red, much redder than the violet sea glowing in the light of the great moon that had now cleared the horizon. I felt the weakness growing in me and realized that I was bleeding to death. The water was becoming warmer, as if my blood were heating it to a comfortable temperature, and the temptation to close my eyes and move deeper into that warmth grew stronger from moment to moment. I admit that each time the ocean swell bore me up, I kept looking over my shoulder for some sign of the raft, for some miracle from the north. I saw nothing there. Part of me was pleased at this. The raft had probably transited the farcaster portal by now. It had not been intercepted. I had seen no skimmers, no thopters, and the platform was only a diminishing blaze to the south. I realized that my best hope was to be picked up by a searching thopter now that the raft was safely gone, but even the thought of such rescue did not cheer me. I had been to the platform once this day. Floating on my back, twisting my head and neck to keep the colored dorsals in view, I kicked my way north, rising with each great movement of the violet sea, dropping into wide troughs as the ocean seemed to breathe in. I rotated to my stomach and tried kicking more strongly, my handcuffed fists straight ahead of me, but I was too exhausted to keep my head above water that way. My right arm seemed to be bleeding more fiercely now, and seemed 3 times as heavy as the left. I guessed that the lieutenant's blade had severed tendons there. Finally, I had to give up swimming and concentrate on floating, my feet kicking to keep me up, my head and shoulders above water, my fists clenched in front of my face. The saberback things seemed to sense my weakness. They took turns swimming at me, their great mouths open to feed. Each time I pulled my legs up and kicked straight out, trying to strike their snouts or brain pans with my heels without having my feet bitten off. Their rough skin had abraded the flesh of my heels and soles to the point that I was adding more blood to the sphere that must be around me. It made the dorsal things wilder. Their attacks came closer together as I grew too tired to pull my legs up each time. One of the long fish ripped my right pant leg off from the knee to the ankle, pulling a layer of skin with it as it moved away with a triumphant stroke of its tail. Part of my tired mind had been pondering theology during all this, not praying, but wondering about a cosmic god who allowed its creatures to torture each other like this. How many hominids, mammals, and trillions of other creatures had spent their last minutes in mortal fear such as this, their hearts pounding, their adrenaline coursing through them and exhausting them more quickly, their small minds racing in the hopeless quest of escape? How could any god describe him or herself as a god of mercy and fill the universe with fanged things such as this? I remember Grandam telling me about an early old Earth scientist, one Charles Darwin, who had come up with one of the early theories of evolution or gravitation or some such, and how, although raised a devout Christian even before the reward of the cruciform, he had become an atheist while studying the terrestrial wasp that paralyzed some large species of spider, planted its embryo, and let the spider recover and go about its business until it was time for the hatched wasp larva to burrow its way out of the living spider's abdomen. I shook water out of my eyes and kicked at 2 of the dorsal fins rushing at me. I missed the head, but struck one of the sensitive fins. Only by pulling my legs up into a ball did I avoid the snapping maw. Losing my buoyancy for a moment, I went a meter or more under the next wave, swallowed salt water, and came up gasping and blind. More fins circled closer. Swallowing water again, I struggled with my numb hands under water and came up with the pistol, almost dropping it before propping it against my chin. I realized that it would be easier just to leave the muzzle under my chin and pull the trigger than to try to use it against these sea killers. Well, there were quite a few slugs left in the thing. I had not used it during all of the excitement of the last couple of hours, so it would remain an option. Swiveling, watching the closest dorsal move even closer, I remembered a story Grandam had read to me when I was a boy. It was also an ancient classic, a thing by Stephen Crane called The Open Boat, and it was about several men who had survived the sinking of their ship and days at sea without water, only to be stuck a few hundred meters from land by surf too high to cross without capsizing. One of the men in the boat, I could not remember which character, had moved through all of the circles of theological supposition, praying, believing that God was a merciful deity who sat up nights worrying about him, then believing that God was a cruel bastard, and finally deciding that no one was listening. I realized now that I had not understood that story, despite Grandam's Socratic questions and careful guidance. I thought that I remembered the weight of epiphany that had fallen on that character as he realized that they would have to swim for it, and that not all of them could survive. He had wanted nature, for this is how he now thought of the universe, to be a huge glass building, just so that he could cast stones at it. But even that, he realized, would be useless. The universe is indifferent to our fates. This was the crushing burden that the character took with him as he struggled through the surf toward survival or extinction. The universe just does not give a shit. I realized that I was laughing and weeping at the same time, shouting curses and invitations to the saberback things that were only 2 or 3 meters out. I leveled the pistol and fired at the closest fin. Amazingly, the soaked slug thrower fired, the noise that had been so loud on the raft now seemingly swallowed by the waves and immensity of the sea. The fish dived out of sight. 2 more lunged at me. I shot at one, kicked at the other, just as something struck me hard on the neck from behind. I was not so lost in theology and philosophizing that I was ready to die. I swiveled quickly, not knowing how badly I had been bitten, but determined to shoot the goddamn thing in the mouth if I had to. I had the heavy pistol cocked and aimed before I saw the girl's face there, 1/2 meter from my own. Her hair was plastered to her skull, and her dark eyes were bright in the moonlight. "Raul!" She must have been calling my name before, but I had not heard over the gunshot and the rushing in my ears. I blinked salt water away. This could not be real. Oh, Jesus, why should she be out here, away from the raft? "Raul!" Aenea called again. "Float on your back! Use the gun to keep those things away! I'll pull you in!" I shook my head. I did not understand. Why would she leave the powerful android on the raft and come after me by herself? How could... Bettik's blue scalp became visible over the next large swell. The android was swimming strongly with both arms, the long machete clamped in his white teeth. I confess that I laughed through my tears. He looked like a cheap Hollows version of a pirate. "Float on your back!" shouted the girl again. I turned on my back, too tired to kick as a shark thing lunged at my legs. I shot between my feet at it, striking it square between its black, lifeless eyes. The 2 fins disappeared beneath the water. Beneath the wave, sorry. Aenea set one arm around my neck, her left hand under my right arm so that she was not choking me, and began swimming strongly up the next huge swell. Bettik swam alongside, paddling with one arm now as he wielded the sharp machete with the other. I saw him slice into the water and watched 2 dorsal fins shudder and swerve to the right. "What are you—" I began, choking and coughing. "Save your breath," gasped the girl, pulling me down into the next trough and up the violet wall ahead of us. "We have a long way to go." "The pistol," I said, trying to hand it to her. I felt the darkness closing on my vision like a narrowing tunnel and did not want to lose the weapon. Too late. I felt it drop into the sea. "Sorry," I managed before the tunnel closed completely. My last conscious thought was an inventory of what I had lost on my first solo expedition. The treasured hawking mat, my night goggles, the antique automatic pistol, my boots, probably the comm unit, and quite possibly my life and the lives of my friends. Total darkness cut off the end of this cynical speculation. I was vaguely aware of their lifting me onto the raft. The girl was breathing into my mouth, then pumping water out of my lungs with pressure against my chest. Bettik knelt next to us, pulling strongly on a heavy line. After retching water for several minutes, I said, "The raft! How? It should have been to the portal by now. I don't—" Aenea pushed my head back against a pack and cut away rags of my shirt and right trouser leg with a short knife. Bettik rigged a sort of sea anchor using the micro-tent and the climbing rope, she said. It's dragging behind, slowing us down but keeping us on course. It gave us time to find you. How? I began, and then started coughing salt water again. Hush, said the girl, ripping the last of my shirt away. I want to see how badly you're hurt. I winced as her strong hands touched the great gash on my side. Her fingers found the deep cut on my upper arm, ran down my side to where the fish had taken the skin down my calf and thigh. Ah, Raul, she said sadly, I let you out of my sight for an hour or two, and look what you do to yourself. The weakness was overwhelming me again, the darkness returning. I knew that I had lost too much blood. I was very bold. I'm sorry, I whispered. Quiet. She tore open the larger of our med packs with a loud ripping noise. Hush. No, I insisted. I screwed up. I was supposed to be your protector. Guard you. Sorry. I cried out as she poured antiseptic sulfa solution directly into the wound on my side. I had seen men weep at this on the battlefield. Now I was one of them. If it had been my modern medpack that the girl had opened, I am sure I would have died minutes, if not seconds, later. But it was the larger pack, the ancient Force-issue medpack we'd taken from the ship. My first thought was that all of the medicines and instruments would be useless after so long a time, but then I saw the blinking lights on the surface of the pack she had laid on my chest. Some were green, more were yellow, a few were red. I knew that this was not good. Lie back, whispered Aenea, and tore open a sterile suture pack. She laid the clear bag against my side, and the millipede suture within came to life and crawled to my wound. The sensation was not pleasant, as the tailored life form crawled into the ragged walls of my wound, secreted its antibiotic and cleansing secretions, then drew its sharp millipede legs together in a tight suture. I cried out again. Then again, a moment later, as she applied another millipede suture to my arm. We need more plasma cartridges, she said to Bettik as she fed 2 of the small cylinders into the pack injection system. I felt the burn on my thigh as the plasma entered my system. Those 4 are all that we have, said the android. He was busy working on me now, setting an osmosis mask in place over my face. Pure oxygen began to flow into my lungs. Damn, said the girl, injecting the last of the plasma cartridges. He's lost too much blood. He's going into deep shock. I wanted to argue with them, explain that my shaking and shivering was just a result of the cold air, that I felt much better, but the osmosis mask pressed everywhere against my mouth, eyes, nose, and did not allow me to speak. For a moment I hallucinated that we were back in the ship and the crash field was holding me secure again. I think that all the salt water on my face at that moment was not from the sea. Then I saw the ultramorph injector in the girl's hands, and I began to struggle. I did not want to be knocked out. If I was going to die, I wanted to be awake when it happened. Aenea pushed me back against the backpack. She understood what I was trying to say. I want you out, Raul, she said softly. "You're going into shock. We need to get your vital signs stabilized. It'll be easier if you're out." The injector hissed. I thrashed for another few seconds, weeping tears of frustration now. After all that effort, to slip away while unconscious. God damn it, it wasn't fair. It wasn't right. I awoke to bright sunlight and terrible heat. For a moment I was sure that we were still on the sea of Mare Infinitus, but when I worked up enough energy to lift my head, I could see that the sun was different. Larger, hotter, and the sky was a much paler shade of blue. The raft seemed to be moving along some sort of concrete canal with only a meter or two to spare on either side. I could see concrete, sun, and blue sky, nothing else. "Lie back," said Aenea, pushing my head and shoulders back on the pack and adjusting the microtent fabric so that my face was in shade again. Obviously, they had retrieved their sea anchor. I tried to speak, failed, licked dry lips that seemed stitched together, and finally managed, "How long have I been out?" Aenea gave me a sip of water from my own canteen before replying. "About 30 hours. 30 hours! Even trying to shout, I could do little more than squeak. Bettik came around the side of the tent and crouched in the shade with us. "Welcome back, Endymion." "Where are we?" Aenea answered. "Judging from the desert sun and the stars last night, it's almost certain we're on Hyperion. We seem to be traveling along some aqueduct. Right now, well, you should see this." She supported my shoulders so I could see over the concrete lip of the canal. Nothing but air and distant hills. "We're about 50 meters up on this section of the aqueduct," she said, lowering my head to the pack again. "It's been like this for the last 5 or 6 clicks. If there's been a breach in the aqueduct," she smiled ruefully, "we haven't seen anyone or anything, not even a vulture. We're waiting until we come into a city." I frowned, feeling the stiffness in my side and arm as I shifted position ever so slightly. "Hyperion? I thought it was—" "Captured by the ousters," finished Bettik. "Yes, that was our information as well. It does not matter, sir. We will seek medical care for you with the ousters as happily, more happily, than we would with the packs." I looked down at the med pack now lying next to me. Filaments ran to my chest, arms, and legs. Chest, arm, and legs. Most of the lights on the pack were blinking amber. This was not good. "Your wounds are sealed and cleaned," said Aenea. "We gave you all the plasma the old pack had, but you need more, and there seems to be some sort of infection that the multi-spectrum antibiotics can't handle." That explained the terrible feverish quality I felt beneath my skin. "Perhaps some microorganism in the sea on Mare Infinitus," said Bettik. "The medpack cannot quite diagnose it. We will know when we get to a hospital. It is our guess that this section of the Tethys will lead to Hebron's one large city." "New Jerusalem," I whispered. "Yes," said the android. "Even after the fall, it was famous for its Sinai Medical Center." I started to shake my head, but stopped when the pain and dizziness struck. "But the ousters—" Aenea moved a damp cloth across my brow. "We're going to get help for you," she said. "Ousters or no ousters?" A thought was trying to burrow up out of my befuddled brain. I waited until it arrived. "Hebron didn't have... I don't think it had—" "You are right, sir," said Bettik. He tapped the small book in his hand. According to the guide, Hebron was not part of the river Tethys, and allowed only a single farcaster terminex in New Jerusalem, even during the height of the web. Off-world visitors were not allowed to leave the capital. They treasured privacy and independence here. I looked out at the passing aqueduct walls. Suddenly we were off the high trestle and moving between high dunes and sun-baked rocks. The heat was terrible. The heat was terrible. But the book must have been wrong, said Aenea, mopping my brow again. The farcaster portal was there, and we're here.
You're sure it's Hebron?
I whispered. Aenea nodded. Bettik held up the comlog bracelet. I had forgotten about it. Our mechanical friend here got a reliable star sighting, he said. We are on Hebron and, I would guess, only hours away from New Jerusalem. Pain tore through me then, and no matter how I tried to hide it, I must have writhed. Aenea brought the ultramorph injector out.
No,
I said through cracked lips. This is the last one for a while, she whispered. I heard the hiss and felt the blessed numbness spreading. If there is a god, I thought, it's a painkiller. When I awoke again, the shadows were long and we were in the shade of a low building. Bettik was carrying me from the raft. Each step sent pain racking through me. I made no sound. Aenea was walking ahead. The street was wide and dusty, the buildings low, none over 3 stories, and made of an adobe-like material. No one was in sight. "Hello?" called the child, cupping her hands to her mouth. The 2 syllables echoed down the empty street. I felt foolish, being carried like a child, but Bettik did not seem to mind, and I knew that I could not stand if my life depended on it. Aenea walked back to us, saw my open eyes, and said, "This is New Jerusalem. There is no doubt. According to the guidebook, 3 million people lived here during the web days, and Bettik says there were at least 1 million still here the last he heard." "Ousters," I managed. Aenea nodded tersely. "The shops and buildings near the canal were empty, but they looked like they'd been lived in until a few weeks or months ago." Bettik said, "According to the transmissions we monitored on Hyperion, this world was supposed to have fallen to the Ousters approximately 3 standard years ago. But there are signs of habitation here much more recent than that." "The power grid's still on," said Aenea. "Food that was left out has all spoiled, but the fridge compartments are still cold. Tables are set in some of the houses, hollow pits humming with static, radios hissing. But no people." "But also no signs of violence," said the android, laying me carefully in the back of a ground car with a flat metal bed behind the cab. Aenea had set out a blanket to keep my skin away from the hot metal. The pain in my side sent spots dancing in front of my eyes. Aenea rubbed her arms. There were goosebumps there despite the blazing heat of the evening. "But something terrible happened here," she said. "I can feel it." I admit that I felt nothing but pain and fever. My thoughts were like mercury, always shifting away before I could grab them or form them into a cohesive shape. Aenea jumped up onto the flatbed of the ground car and crouched next to me, while Bettik opened the door to the cab and crawled in. Amazingly, the vehicle started with a touch of the ignition plate. "I can drive this," said the android, putting the vehicle in gear. "So can I thought at them. "I drove one like it in Ursus. It's one of the few things in the universe I know how to drive. It may be one of the few things I can do right." We bumped down the main street. The pain made me cry out a few times, despite my best efforts to stay quiet. I clamped my jaws tight. Aenea was holding my hand. Her fingers felt so cool that they almost made me shiver. I realized that my own skin was on fire. "It's that damned infection," she was saying. "Otherwise you'd be recovering now. Something in that ocean." "Or on his knife," I whispered. I closed my eyes and saw the lieutenant flying to pieces as the flechette clouds tore into him. I opened my eyes to escape the image. The buildings were taller here, 10 stories at least, and they cast a deeper shade. But the heat was terrible. "A friend of my mother's on the last Hyperion pilgrimage lived here for a while," she was saying. Her voice seemed to move in and out of hearing range, like a poorly tuned radio station.
"Saul Weintraub," I croaked, "the scholar in the old poet's Cantos."
Aenea patted my hand. "I forget that everything Mother lived has become grist for Uncle Martin's legend mill." We bounced over a bump. I ground my back teeth together to keep from screaming. Aenea's grip on my hand intensified. "Yes," she said, "I wish I had met the old scholar and his daughter."
"They went ahead in the Sphinx," I managed, "like you did."
Aenea leaned close, moistened my lips from the canteen, and nodded. "Yes, but I remember Mother's stories about Hebron and the kibbutzim here."
"Jews,"
I whispered, and then quit talking. It took too much energy that I needed to fight the pain. "They fled the second Holocaust," she said, looking ahead now as the ground car rounded a corner. "They called their Hejera the Diaspora." I closed my eyes. The lieutenant flew apart. His clothing and a flesh seemed mingled. I closed my eyes. The lieutenant flew apart, his clothing and flesh mangled to long streamers that spiraled slowly down to the violet sea. Suddenly, Bettik was lifting me. We were entering a building larger and more sinuous than the others, all soaring plasteel and tempered glass. "The medical center," the android said. The automatic door whispered open ahead of us. "It has power. Now, if only the medical machinery is intact." I must have dozed briefly, for when I opened my eyes again, terrified because the twin dorsal fins were circling closer and closer, I was on the gurney trolley being slid into a long cylinder of some sort of diagnostic autosurgeon. "See you later," Aenea was saying, releasing my hand. "See you on the other side." We were on Hebron for 13 of its local days, each day being some 29 standard hours. For the first 3 days, the autosurgeon had its way with me. No fewer than 8 invasive surgeries and an even dozen therapy treatments according to the digitized record at the end. It was, indeed, some microorganism from that miserable ocean on Mare Infinitus that had decided to kill me, although when I saw the magnetic resonance and deep bioradar scans, I realized that the organism had not been so micro after all. Whatever it was, the auto-diagnostic equipment was ambivalent, had taken a hold along the inside of my scraped rib and grown like fen fungus until it had begun to branch out to my internal organs. Another standard day without surgery, the autosurgeon reported later, and they would have made the initial incision to find only lichen and liquefaction. After opening me up, cleaning me out, and then repeating the process twice more when infinitesimal traces of the ocean-borne organism started colonizing again, the autosurgeon pronounced the fungus kaput and began working on my lesser life-threatening wounds. The knife cut in the side had opened me up enough that I should have bled to death, especially with all of my kicking and a high pulse rate brought on by my dorsaled friends in the sea. Evidently, the plasma cartridges in the old med pack and several days of being kept near comatose by Aenea's liberal doses of ultramorph had kept me alive until the surgeon could transfuse 8 more units of plasma into me. The deep wound in my arm had not, as I had feared, severed tendons, but enough important muscles and nerves had been slashed that the autosurgeon had worked on that arm during operations 2 and 3. Because the hospital still had power when we arrived, the surgeon had taken it upon its own silicon initiative to have the organ tanks in the basement grow the replacement nerves I needed. On the 8th day, when Aenea sat at my bedside and told me how the autosurgeon repeatedly kept asking for advice and authorization from its human overseers, I was even able to laugh when she talked of how Dr. Bettik authorized each critical operation, transplant, and therapy. I guess because he's perceived as the adult. Because Aenea's still like 11 years old. The leg the color shark had tried to bite off turned out to be the most painful part of the ordeal. After the infinitus fungus had been cleaned out of the area laid bare by the shark's teeth, new skin and muscle tissue had been transplanted, layer by layer. It hurt. And after it quit hurting, it itched. During my second week of confinement in that hospital, I was undergoing ultramorph withdrawal and would seriously have considered holding my pistol on the girl or the android and demanding morph if I had actually believed they could be intimidated into bringing me relief from withdrawal symptoms and that hellish itching. But the pistol was gone, sunk in the bottomless violet sea. It was on about the 8th day, when I could sit up in bed and actually eat food, although just bland, vat-replicated hospital food, that I talked to Aenea about my short stint as hero. On my last night on Hyperion, I got drunk with the old poet and promised him I'd accomplish certain things on this trip, I said. "What things?" said the girl, her spoon in my dish of green gelatin. "Oh, nothing much," I said. "Protect you, get you home, find old Earth, and bring it back so he could see it again before he died." Aenea paused in her gelatin eating. Her dark eyebrows were very high on her forehead. "He told you to bring old Earth back? Interesting." "That's not all," I said. "Along the way, I was supposed to talk to the ousters, destroy the Pax, overthrow the Church, and, I quote, find out what the fuck the Technocore is up to and stop it." Aenea set her spoon down and dabbed at her lips with my napkin. "Is that all?" "Not quite," I said, leaning back into my pillows. "He also wanted me to keep the Shrike from hurting you or destroying humanity." "Is that it?" She nodded. "Is that it?" I rubbed my sweaty forehead with my good left hand. "I think so. At least that's all I remember. I was drunk, as I said." I looked at the child. "How am I doing with the list?" Aenea made that casting away gesture with her slender hands. "Not bad. You have to remember that we've only been at this a few standard months. Less than 3, actually." "Yeah," I said, looking out the window at the low shafts of sunlight striking the tall adobe buildings across from the hospital. Beyond the city, I could see the rocky hills burning red with evening light. "Yeah," I said again, all of the energy and amusement drained from my voice. "I'm doing great." I sighed and pushed the dinner tray farther away. "One thing I don't understand, even in all that confusion, I don't know why their radar didn't track the raft when we were so close." "A Bettik shot it out," said the girl, working on the green gelatin again. "Say what?" "A Bettik shot it out. The radar dish, with your plasma rifle." She finished the green goop and set the spoon in place. During the last week she had been nurse, doctor, chef, and bottle washer. "I thought he said he could not shoot at humans," I said. "He can't," said Aenea, clearing the tray and setting it on a nearby dresser. "I asked him, but he said that there was no prohibition against his shooting as many radar dishes as he wanted. So he did, before we fixed your position and dived in to save you." "That was a 3 or 4 click shot," I said, "from a pitching raft. How many pulse bolts did he use?" "1," said Aenea. She was looking at the monitor readouts above my head. I whistled softly. "I hope he never gets mad at me, even from a distance." "I think you'd have to be a radar dish before you'd have to worry," she said, tucking in the clean sheets. "Where is he?" Aenea walked to the window and pointed east. "He found an EMV that had a full charge and was checking out the kibbutzim way out toward the Great Salt Sea." "All the others have been empty?" "Every one. Not even a dog, cat, horse, or pet chipmunk left behind." I knew that she was not kidding. We had talked about it. When communities are evacuated in a hurry, or when disaster strikes, pets are often left behind. Packs of wild dogs had been a problem during the South Talon uprising on Aquila. The Home Guard had to shoot former pets on sight. That means they had time to take their pets with them, I said. Aenea turned toward me and crossed her thin arms. And leave their clothes behind? And their computers, comm logs, private diaries, family holes, all their holos, all their personal junk? And none of those tell you what happened? No final diary entries? No surveillance cameras or frenzied last-minute comm log entries? Nope, said the girl. At first I was reluctant to intrude into their private comm logs and such, but by now I've played back dozens of them. During the last week there was the usual news of the fighting nearby. The Great Wall was less than a light year away, and the Pax ships were filling the system. They didn't come down to the planet much, but it was obvious that Hebron would have to join the Pax Protectorate after it was all over. Then there were some final newscasts about the ousters breaking through the lines. Then nothing. Our guess is that the Pax evacuated the entire population and then the ousters moved on, but there's no notice of evacuation in the news holos, or in the computer entries, or anywhere. It's like the people just disappeared. She rubbed her arms. I have some of the holocast discs if you want to see them. Maybe later, I said. I was very tired. Bettik will be back in the morning, she said, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. Beyond the window, the sun had set, but the hills literally glowed from the stored-up light. It was a twilight effect of the stones on this world that I thought I would never tire of watching. But right then, I could not keep my eyes open. Do you have the shotgun? I mumbled. The plasma rifle? Bettik's gone. All alone here. They're on the raft, said Aenea. Now go to sleep. On the first day I was fully conscious, I tried to thank both of them for saving my life. They resisted. How did you find me? I asked. It wasn't hard, said the girl. You left the mic open right up to the time the Pax officer stabbed it and broke it. We could hear everything, and we could see you through the binoculars. You shouldn't have both left the raft, I said. It was too dangerous. Not really, Endymion, said Bettik. Besides rigging the sea anchor, which slowed the raft's progress considerably, Aenea had the idea of tying one of the climbing ropes to a small log for flotation and allowing the line to trail behind the raft for almost 100 meters. If we could not catch up to the raft, we felt certain we could get you back to the trailing line before it moved out of reach. And, as events showed, we did. I shook my head. It was still stupid. You're welcome, said the girl. On the 10th day, I tried standing. It was a short-lived victory, but a victory nonetheless. On the 12th day, I walked the length of the corridor to the toilet there. That was a major victory. On the 13th day, the power failed all over the city. Emergency generators in the hospital basement kicked in, but we knew our time there was limited. I wish we could take the autosurgeon with us, I said as we sat on the 9th floor terrace that last evening, looking down on the shadowed avenues. It wouldn't fit on the raft, said Bettik, but the extension cord would be a problem. Seriously, I said, trying not to sound like the paranoid, victimized, demoralized patient that I was then, we need to check the pharmacies here for stuff we need. Done, said Aenea. 3 new and improved med packs, 1 whole pouch of plasma ampoules, a portable diagnosticator, ultramorph, but don't ask, you aren't getting any today. I held out my left hand. See this? It just stopped shaking this afternoon. I won't be asking for any again soon. Aenea nodded. Overhead, feathery clouds glowed with the last evening light. How long do you think these generators will hold out? I said to the android. The hospital was one of only a handful of city buildings still lighted. A few weeks, perhaps, said Bettik. "The power grid has been repairing and running itself for months, but the planet is harsh. You've noticed the dust storms that sweep in from the desert each morning, and even though the technology is quite advanced for a non-Pax world, the place needs humans to maintain it."
"Entropy is a bitch," I said.
Now, said Aenea from where she was leaning on the terrace wall. "Entropy can be our friend."
"When?" I said.
She turned around so that she was leaning back on her elbows. The building behind her was a dark rectangle, serving to highlight the glow of her sunburned skin. "It wears down empires," she said, "and does in despotisms."
"That's a hard phrase to say quickly," I said. "What despotisms are we talking about here?"
Aenea made that casting away gesture, and for a minute I thought she was not going to speak, but then she did. "The Huns, the Scythians, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Egyptians, Macedonians, Romans, and Assyrians." "Yeah," I said, "but the Avars and Northern Wei," she continued, "and the Huanhuans, the Mamelukes, the Persians, Arabs, Abbasids, and Seljuks." "Okay," I said, "but I don't see—" "The Kurds and Ghaznavids," she continued, smiling now, "not to mention the Mongols, Sui, Tang, Boumenids, Crusaders, Cossacks, Prussians, Nazis, Soviets, Japanese, Javanese, North Amas, Greater Chinese, Columperos, and Antarctic nationalists." I held up a hand. She stopped. Looking at Bettik, I said, "I don't even know these planets, do you?" The android's expression was neutral. "I believe they all relate to old Earth, Endymion." "No shit," I said. "No shit is, I believe, correct in this context," Bettik said in a flat tone. I looked back at the girl. "So this is our plan to topple the Pax for the old poet? Hide out somewhere and wait for entropy to take its toll?" She crossed her arms again. She said. "Normally that would have been a good plan. Just hunker down for a few millennia and let time take its course. But these damn cruciforms complicate the equation." "How do you mean?" I said, my voice serious. "Even if we wanted to topple the Pax," she said, "which, by the way, I don't. That's your job. But even if we wanted to, entropy's not on our side anymore with that parasite that can make people almost immortal." "Almost immortal," I murmured. "When I was dying, I must admit that I thought of the cruciform. It would have been a lot easier, not to mention less painful than all the surgery and recovery, just to die and let the thing resurrect me." Aenea was looking at me. Finally, she said, "That's why this planet had the best medical care in or out of the Pax." "Why?" I said. My head was still thick with drugs and fatigue. "They are, Jews," the girl said softly. "Very few accepted the cross. They only had one chance at life." We sat for some time without speaking that evening, as the shadows filled the city canyons of New Jerusalem, and the hospital hummed with electric life while it still could. The next morning I walked as far as the old ground car that had hauled me to the hospital 13 days earlier, but, sitting in the back where they had made a mattress bed for me, I gave orders to find a gun shop. After an hour of driving around, it became obvious that there were no gun shops in New Jerusalem. "All right," I said, "a police headquarters." There were several of these. As I hobbled into the first one we encountered, waving away offers from both girl and android to act as a crutch, I soon discovered how underarmed a peaceful society could be. There were no weapons racks there, not even riot guns or stunners. "I don't suppose Hebron had an army or home guard?" I said. "I believe not," replied Bettik. "Until the Ouster incursion 3 standard years ago, there were no human enemies or dangerous animals on the planet." I grunted and kept looking. Finally, after breaking open a triple-locked drawer in the bottom of some police chief's desk, I found something. "A Steiner Gin, I believe," said the android. "A pistol firing reduced-charge plasma bolts." "I know what it is," I said. There were two magazines in the drawer. That should be about 60 bolts. I went outside, aimed the weapon at a distant hillside, and squeezed the trigger ring. The pistol coughed. It says couched. That is what the text says. It's got to be coughed. The pistol coughed, and the hillside showed a tiny flash. Good, I said, fitting the old weapon in my empty holster. I was afraid that it would be a signature weapon, capable of being fired only by its owner. Those weapons went in and out of vogue over the centuries. "We have the flechette pistol on the raft," began Bettik. I shook my head. I wanted nothing to do with those things for a good while. Bettik and Aenea had stocked up on water and food while I had been recuperating, and by the time I hobbled to the landing at the canal and looked at our refitted and refurbished raft, I could see the extra boxes. "Question," I said. "Why are we going on with this floating woodpile when there are comfortable little runabout boats tied up over there? Or we could take an EMV and travel in air-conditioned comfort." The girl and the blue-skinned man exchanged glances. "We voted while you were recovering," she said. "We go on with the raft." "Don't I get a vote?" I snapped. I had meant to feign anger, but when it came, it was real enough. "Sure," said the girl, standing on the dock with her feet planted, legs apart, and her hands on her hips. "Vote." "I vote we get an EMV and travel in comfort," I said, hearing the petulant tone in my voice and hating it even while continuing it. "Or even one of these boats. I vote we leave these logs behind." "Vote recorded," said the girl. "Bettik and I voted to keep the raft. It's not going to run out of power, and it can float. One of these boats would have shown up on the radar on Mare Infinitus, and an EMV couldn't have made the trip on some worlds. 2 for keeping the raft, 1 against. We keep it." "Who made this a democracy?" I demanded. I admit that I had images of spanking this kid. "Who made it anything else?" said the girl. All through this, Bettik stood by the edge of the dock, fiddling with a rope, his face a study in that embarrassed expression that most people get when around members of another family squabbling. He was wearing a loose tunic and baggy shorts made of yellow linen. There was a wide-brimmed yellow hat on his head. "'Cause he's stylish, damn it. He's a stylish man." Contrasts beautifully with his blue skin. Aenea stepped onto the raft and loosed the stern line. "You want a boat or an EMV, or a floating couch for that matter? You take it, Raul. Bettik and I are going on in this." I started hobbling toward a nice little dinghy lined up along the dock. "Wait," I said, pivoting on my stronger leg to look at her again. "The farcaster won't work if I try to go through alone." "Right," said the girl. Bettik had stepped aboard the raft, and now she cast off the forward line. The canal was much wider here than it had been in the concrete trough of the aqueduct, about 30 meters across as it ran through New Jerusalem. Bettik stood at the steering oar and looked at me as the girl picked up one of the longer poles and pushed the raft away from the dock. "Wait!" I said. "God damn it, wait!" I hobbled down the pier, jumped the meter or so to the raft, landed on my recuperating leg, and had to catch myself with my good arm before I rolled into the micro-tent. Aenea offered me her hand, but I ignored it as I got to my feet. "God, you're a stubborn brat," I said. "Look who's talking," said the girl, and went forward to sit at the front of the raft as we moved into the center current. Out of the shade of the buildings, Hebron's sun was even fiercer. I pulled on my old tricorn cap for a bit of shade as I stood by the steering oar with Bettik. "I imagine you're on her side," I said at last as we moved into the open desert and the river narrowed to a canal once again. "I am quite neutral, Endymion," said the blue-skinned man. "Ha!" I said. "You voted to stay with the raft." It has served us well so far, sir," said the android, stepping back as I hobbled closer and took the steering oar in my hands. I looked at the new crates of provisions stacked neatly in the shade of the tent, at the stone hearth with its heating cube and pots and pans, at the shotgun and plasma rifle, freshly oiled and laid under canvas covers, and at our packs, sleeping bags, medkits, and other stuff. The forward mast had been raised while I was gone, and now one of Bettik's extra white shirts flew from it like a flapping pennant. "Well," I said at last, "screw it." "Precisely, sir," said the android. The next portal was only 5 clicks out of town. I squinted up at Hebron's blazing sun as we passed through the arch's thin shadow, then into the line of the portal itself. With the other farcaster portals, there had been a moment when the air within shimmered and changed, giving us a glance at what lay ahead. Here, there was only absolute blackness. And the blackness did not change as we continued on. The temperature dropped at least 70 degrees centigrade. At the same instant, the gravity changed. It suddenly felt as if I were carrying something my own mass on my back. "The lamps!" I called, still holding the steering oar against a suddenly strong current. I was struggling to stay on my feet against the terrible drag of increased gravity there. The combination of chilling cold, absolute blackness, and oppressive weight was terrifying. The two had loaded lanterns they had found in New Jerusalem, but it was the old hand lamp that Aenea flicked on first. Its beam cut through icy vapor, across black water, and lifted to illuminate a roof of solid ice some 15 meters above us. Stalactites of patterned ice hung down almost to the water. Daggers of ice protruded from the black current on either side and ahead of us. Far ahead, about where the beam began to dim at 100 meters or so, there seemed to be a solid wall of icy blocks running right down to the water's surface. We were in an ice cave, and one with no visible way out. The cold burned at my exposed hands, arms, and face. The gravity lay on my neck like so many iron collars. "Damn," I said. I locked the steering oar in place and hobbled toward the packs. It was hard to stay upright with a bad leg and 80 kilos on my back. Bettik and the girl were already there, digging for our insulated clothing. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. I looked up, expecting to see a stalactite falling on us, or the roof caving in under this terrible weight, but it was only our mast snapping where it had struck a low-hanging shelf of ice. The mast fell much faster than it would have in Hyperion gravity, rushing to the raft as if someone had fast-forwarded a hollow. Wood chips flew as it hit. Bettik's shirt struck with an audible crash. It was frozen solid and covered with a thin coat of hoarfrost. "Damn," I said again, my teeth chattering, and dug for my woolen undies. And that is where we will call it for today. If I know how to press button good. Let's see. Tomorrow we are on. We are on for tomorrow. So we will do more of this tomorrow. We will continue. Find out what this ice cave business is all about. I can tell you with some authority that we are going to be introduced to a new character pretty soon. A memorable one. Entertaining in some ways. Not so entertaining in others. We'll get there when we get there. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow that we'll get to it, but eventually. I do not know what next week's schedule looks like just yet. When I know more, I will post it on the Discord. I have to, at some point, get around to changing the channel descriptions on both YouTube and Twitch to reflect that my schedule is now catch as catch can. Which, again, sucks for predictability, but them's the breaks. If I can get something more predictable, I'll happily do it. But until such time as that occurs, bear with me. The current game plan is to keep reading through Endymion, the Endymion Omnibus, both volumes of it. There is a short story collection by Dan Simmons that has a story that ties into the Hyperion Cantos and Endymion. It is a distant sequel, sort of, to the events of The Rise of Endymion, which is the second book in the Endymion duology. Just kind of reflecting. It's kind of its own story. I will probably do the whole short story collection because it's full of good ones. It's quite good. I highly recommend. I think it's called Stars Enough and Time. Worlds Enough and Time? Worlds Enough and Time, I believe it is called. And Time, sorry. Worlds Enough and Time by Dan Simmons.
So we'll get to that when we get to that. That's the current plan. I may do a book in between those two. After that, I want to fast track getting to Cytine by C.J. Cherry. It's a good one. I've been looking forward to doing a reread of that one myself anyway, and I think it's worthwhile. Anything else significant? No, not really. I'll see you all tomorrow. Stay safe, stay sane, stay toasty or cool as your geolocation or personal preference permit. Personal preference or geolocation permit, rather. And be decent to each other. The usual ending spiel. If you want to chat with me, feel free to join the Discord. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. I don't feel bad. I get it. Especially now that Discord's been bought out. I have concerns. Like, it's not my favorite platform in the world, but it's convenient because I don't really do the social media thing. Otherwise, if you want to leave comments or whatever, I do read them. I don't respond to all of them. But I do read them. And I don't say that just to juke the algorithm. I am earnestly interested in feedback. I don't make money off this. I don't do this for money. I do this for funsies. I'm working on getting a Patreon or something set up once I get the financials sorted out to see how I can keep from having other people get screwed, including myself. They take a significant cut. And it's not so much that, I want more money. It's more that I don't want you to pay such and such an amount, believing that that's the amount I'm getting when I'm not actually getting that. Also, there's obligations. Most Patreons have subscriptions and whatnot, and I do not want to do subscriptions. I would prefer it be one time. I want it to be purely based on people's entire solo willingness to do it out of the goodness of their hearts, as opposed to any kind of other reward. Although I could, I suppose, set up send people USB flash drives of stuff on it if they wanted. I don't know. It's food for thought. I haven't put a ton of thought into it, to be honest, because it's just a fun hobby, and I don't want to make it like a moneymaker or a breadwinner, because I'm already gainfully employed. More gainfully employed now than I would like to be perfectly honest. So my free time is just in shambles right now. So it's not a matter of I'm doing this for a living. I'm doing this because I enjoy it. I'm reading books I enjoy. I'm reading books people have recommended to me, often on this stream, that I enjoy. Great example is The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. As brutally difficult as that one is to read due to the prose, I wish I'd known about it sooner. That one's great. That one's a ton of fun. There's some others that other people have recommended that weren't in my collection. Something someone recommended last week that I have to look into. I'll get around to. Anyway. Yeah. So yeah, see you all tomorrow for some more Endymion by Dan Simmons.